morning, everyone. Can I please inform all members of the public and officers that today's meeting will be recorded and will be available on the Council's website following this meeting. I am Councillor Lewis Simpson, the convener of the local review body, and I'm joined today by, on my left, by Councillor Willie Wilson and on my right by Councillor Henry Anderson. On my far right is Mr David Harrison, who is the planning advisor to the LRB. He is not part of the planning department and had no previous involvement with any of the applications on the agenda today. On my left is Mr Fogg, our legal advisor, and on my far left is Mr Danny Williams from Committee Services. We're also joined by Mrs Bryan from the planning department, who's here to take back to her colleagues any points of interest from the meeting today. And most important of all, we have Lisa Potter on the magic lantern, who assures me that all the IT will work today, don't you, Lisa? Yes, good. We're all, if not, we can all hold hands together and see if that helps, you know. So we can but hope. Are there any declaration of interest, colleagues? No. Today? No. Thank you very much indeed. As regards the minutes for the last meeting, I think we'll take them in future, Danny, if that's okay. We won't take them today. Right. Now, you will notice that there's 10 items on the agenda today. It was a very hard cycle in from Scone with this in my backpack today, so that we'll take some time to go through it all and to scrutinise it all. So we have no idea of time, how much time that will take, but I can advise you that we will have a recess at about 12:30 and get back again at 1 o'clock to finish the business. Now, I propose to take item 5.1 first. So if we can swap Councillor Wilson for Councillor Waters for a moment. Yep. So welcome, Councillor Waters. The reason for the change is that at the previous meeting further information was sought, and it's important it's the same 3 members that consider this information that now has come through. So we'll now move on to item 5.1, which was the alterations to boundary wall, formation of vehicular access and car parking area, Perth Bridge Club in Perth. Can I ask if I know some of the applicants and agents are here. Are you both here from the Bridge Club? Welcome. Now, Mr Harrison, could you please introduce this item?
Excuse me, convener. Oh, yeah. Just before Mr Harrison goes ahead, I've just got a little sort of bit of housekeeping on this item. On pages 549 and 561, the eagle-eyed viewer will have noticed that you actually have reference to application 17-00841/IPL. Just so you know, it's a typographical error. Just when the papers are being pulled together, as you can see, the contents are all for this item, but it's just an unfortunate typographical mistake, and I do apologise for that.
Thanks very much indeed, Danny. The information itself remains accurate. Yes. Right, Mr Harrison, on go.
Thank you, convener. Can I first of all check, can people hear what I'm saying clearly, hopefully? Thank you. This is a planning application in detail for alterations to a boundary wall, formation of vehicular access and car parking area at Perth Bridge Club, 49 to 51 King Street in Perth. The proposal involves the removal of much of the low wall and the replacement of the garden with a parking area to the front of this Georgian villa. The property is a Category C listed building within the Perth Conservation Area. A separate application for the proposed demolition works for listed building consent has been submitted to and refused by the Council. And I'll just take you through the photographs first of all, but you might like to have page 579 onwards, which will provide you with the original drawings, and of course there were revised drawings submitted, and they're on page 608 onwards. The general sequence of the photographs will be the application site frontage, a detail of the gate, that's the existing gate, other properties and driveways and parking in King Street. So the first photograph we have here, I say, is showing the frontage of the property. I maybe draw your attention to first of all, the red line which shows the front wall there, but also the fact that there's a slight different coloration to the frontage of the property, and the, shall we say, lower right-hand side of it is the separate flat with its own driveway, which is, say, you see in this photograph. So moving on from that and slightly to the left of that photograph, we take in the remainder of the frontage, and you maybe notice in this, I say, the street furniture, which I say is referred to in the papers as well. Moving on from that, in slightly more detail, I say we have the driveway, which I mentioned before, to 51A. And then moving on from that, again, we get more of a detail of the original gate, which is referred to in the papers, and the support for that gate as well. And just a detail of that support. Moving on from that, swinging slightly to the left of the previous photograph, we show the section of wall which would be retained and then possibly truncated from that point onwards. Moving on from that, as I say, the original, just to draw clarity between the two sets of plans that have been submitted, the extra area of wall, as it were, has been accommodated, and the position of the gate has been corrected. So this shows the position on the original, which of course been corrected since then. Moving on from that, this is us now looking into some of the garden area associated with the property, and of course the flat below and the window of the flat below, I say, as referred to in the papers. And again, just showing the separation and the internal wall, which would also be removed as part of the proposal. Swinging to the left of this, we have the remainder of the front garden area. And then swinging again slightly to the left, we look down the street and we have the parking spaces in front of the property. This is us now looking out from the inside of the flat, which shows the relationship between the flat's driveway and the application site. Now moving on from that, this is some other properties you see in King Street and their driveway and parking arrangements here. So we see an access into the front of the property here. And again, another access and some existing parking associated with the office accommodation slightly further down the street. And as I say, swinging to the left of that again, further down the street we have some properties which don't have accesses. And again, further down the street, an access and other, shall we say, containment of walls and hedges. Swinging around from that, we then look at the opposite side of the street. Again, showing a number of properties with accesses. And this is just to make reference to the railway wall, which I say is included in the papers. And on the opposite side, we have James Street, just to give you a little bit more of a feel of that part of the conservation area. So I'll leave you with that photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the Bridge Club occupies half of the ground floor and the entire upper floor of the building, the remainder being a residential flat with its own driveway. The proposal is for 4 parking spaces, and again this is referenced in the original submission. It's been revised since then, including a disabled space. The parking area would be surfaced in gravel, laid into a supporting black plastic grid. The footpath and original gate serving the door of number 51 would be retained. A strip of landscaping would run along the boundaries of each side. Some 7.8 metres of frontage wall would be removed to provide access from King Street. Again, that has been slightly revised. The principal planning consideration focuses on the removal of the central section of the stone frontage wall and replacement of the garden ground with a parking area in terms of its impact on the listed building and the surrounding conservation area. It is noted that there have been a range of past changes to buildings and their grounds, including the provision of off-street parking. These are not viewed as having a significant impact on the qualities of the Georgian buildings or the townscape of this locality, which is seen as being dominated by the wall that supports the railway line. The provision of parking is seen as meeting the needs of the current use of the building. The availability of parking in King Street is identified as being limited. Transport Planning has not objected to the proposal. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, this Georgian villa is of a classical design with Doric columned entrance porches and hipped roof form common to most of the buildings in this section of King Street. The frontage stone wall is of random rubble with dressed coping stones. While the original railings have been removed, as is often the case, one original cast iron gate remains. The frontage wall and front garden is seen as making an important contribution to the townscape of this part of the Perth Conservation Area. The Conservation Area appraisal states, and I quote, "The private gardens of this area form part of its distinctiveness," unquote. The proposal is therefore assessed as failing to preserve the character or appearance of the conservation area and is seen as contrary to policy HE3 and the corresponding wording of Scottish planning policy. The removal of most of the frontage wall constitutes a loss of historic building fabric, forming part of the curtilage and setting of the listed building. As such, this is seen as being contrary to local development policy HE2 and the corresponding wording of the Scottish planning policy. Also, the asymmetrical nature of the frontage demolition and parking layout is viewed as being at odds with the symmetry of the villa, a characteristic of the Georgian architecture of this street. Similarly, the replacement of the front garden with a parking area is seen as having a negative impact on the residential amenity of the street and townscape qualities of the locality, contrary to local development plan policies RD1, PM1A and PM1B. It is recognised that there are other properties with off-street parking nearby. In the main, access and parking is to the side and generally does not obstruct the frontages of the buildings or remove front gardens. The proposal is not seen as having a significant adverse impact on the amenity or privacy of adjoining properties. In conclusion, the provision of the off-street parking at this locality is not assessed as outweighing the importance of preserving the historic fabric and setting of the listed building and the character and appearance of the conservation area. In this instance, there have been two representations received, mainly concerning the proposal being a source of noise disturbance with people leaving the building at late hours. If granted, it is requested that a condition be applied to ensure the retention of the landscaping strips. And I draw attention to the further information that's been submitted by the applicant in response to the LRB's request, notably revised plans, and these are contained on page 607 onwards. In this case, there was a request for a site visit. There was no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning officer? Or do we require further information? Councillor Anderson.
No further information required.
Councillor Waters?
Happy to proceed.
Right, thank you very much. So we'll move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Waters, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations to start us off?
Are we able to ask any questions?
Of course you can. Of course you can. Yeah.
First, is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions related to the memorandum that was given on page 613. The first one is just to understand, some of the officers noticed in the paragraph at the very bottom of page 613 that it would be their preference to retain, if we were minded to allow this application to proceed, that a sufficient length of wall to allow a full coping stone, which the gate supports is attached, to be retained. Are we competent to if we were minded to approve this to allow a condition to allow that to happen, would that be competent, given that it would potentially change some of the design elements?
Yes, maybe if I take you back to this photograph. I think first of all, just to be clear what we're talking about here, I think what the officer is saying is, as you'll see, there's a coping stone supporting the gate, which runs approximately a metre or so from the gate. And I think what, in this paragraph, what the officer is saying is, rather than cutting the stone, they would wish to see that stone retained in situ, as it were, and also the gable end of what would become part of the demolished wall treated appropriately, maybe in a similar manner to the gable adjacent to the gate that you see here. So I think that's what the officer is describing there, and I think it would be competent to answer your question directly to seek that through a condition.
Thank you. And one other question on the very last paragraph of that same note, on 614, listed building consent would be required for the proposed works. Can you expand a little bit on that? And the applicant, even if we were minded to approve this, the applicant would still be required to go and get listed building consent. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, as that last paragraph explains, there was a listed building consent application made, which was also declined, but is now time expired in terms of having an appeal. The appeal obviously being dealt with separately from ourselves here, being dealt with by Scottish Government. But if the members were minded to grant consent on the planning side of things, yes, it would still be a matter for the listed building consent application to be needed prior to work commencing on site to carry out the proposal.
Thank you.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Waters? Councillor Anderson, have you any questions of officers?
Just following on from that, and if I'm looking at the plan, and I think it intimates it's 440 for the pier. Are you suggesting at 440, or is the planner suggesting at 440 is not the length of that stone, and therefore this plan would have to be amended if we conditioned the full length of that stone for the...
Which page are we on?
609.
609 is...
There is a dimension of 440, which I would imagine would be the pier for...
It's less than, yeah.
Yes, 440 is, I wouldn't say...
It's cutting short, yeah.
It would be short, so therefore this plan would need to be...
It would
be conditioned that this plan would be amended. Chair, that's kind of what I'm saying, if we were minded that.
Happy with the answer?
Yeah.
Councillor Waters.
Sorry, can I take this just one step further?
Yeah.
Sorry, the same note. I think, if my memory is right, when this came up last time, we did ask a bit about the setup with the parking bays and stuff like that. If we approve this, are these parking bays set in stone, or is it just are we approving the idea that there will be an entrance allowed into the property to allow parking? Or if the way my thinking's going with this, if you changed, if we were minded to approve it and add a condition regarding extending that wall to the full coping thing, that may not change the area of parking, it may change the layout of the parking. Would it be competent for us to do that, and is there still room to change within a condition to change the parking layout?
I think the parking layout you see there is to be candid. If you're minded to grant consent, the discretion of how the actual parking arrangement is conducted is really at the applicant's discretion. The change that's being suggested by the councillor to actually have, shall we say, a slight addition to the extent of wall retained to approximately, I think it's in the order of about a metre, rather than the 440 you see there. That I don't think would have, shall we say, a significant impact on the ability of access to be gained to the site, because obviously you can see there's 6 metres plus in terms of the width of the access, which would remain in those circumstances. And as I say, it would be completely at the discretion of the applicant, or the club, I should really say, to actually use the area for parking as they choose, irrespective of what you see shown on the drawing here.
Okay. Just one question really on that same question. I take it then, if we were minded to grant, that they can park any way they like in that space. We have no control over that.
In effect, it would be, as you imagine, a private parking area, and if they choose to have one or more cars on it, that would be at their discretion, yes. And how that would be arranged would also be at their discretion.
Well, now we can move to debate, I think, if we're happy that we have enough information. So, Councillor Waters, can I ask you to start us off?
Thank you. The issues with the conservation area and stuff like that, there is quite a large amount of properties along that actually have car parking within them, where cars are parked, and I don't think it will be detrimental to the conservation area. So on that point, I'm quite happy to go against the officer's recommendation and say it's okay. On the moving in and out of the site and coming off the main road, both the two parking bays are due to be removed as part of the application, and that next to them you've got two driveways which creates extra space. I don't feel either that someone's coming out into a main road with limited visibility between cars, likes of that. Regarding the parking on site, as we've already covered, it's up to discretionary. Most of the pictures we've seen with other properties, the vehicles, you will know, are actually reversing into the properties, and I would hope with the Bridge Club they would recommend their members do the same, and they don't come in and forward gear, but actually reverse into the parking area so they can leave the street safely. So I would approve this on the condition that the officers request that the full coping stone be retained up to the end of the coping stone and finished off. And I think two reasons. I think aesthetically, I think it does help at least protect. I think that's an amazing gate, you know, from a conservation, and that has to be protected. And I think that would help to do that, and it would create a more stable foundation for the gate. Not that I'm an engineer or anything, but I think that condition I would like to see added into the what I feel is right. So I will say we should allow this. Well, my opinion is we should.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Yes, looked at this quite closely, and there's lots of things that are plus and minuses in the whole thing. But I think when one looks at it overall, the Bridge Club obviously wants to do something with this area, and they want to get some of their members parked within it. Other people, other properties in the area have done similar in the past, and to be quite honest, when one walks up there, these villas, etc., are lovely, and the settings is lovely, and I don't find any of the run-ins that's presently been created has much visual impact. They seem to be very nice and tidy, and I'm sure that this one, by looking at the plans, would be of similar. I heard the minuses. I do have concerns. Personally, I think it is bad if people reversed out into the main street, and though there's no way we can condition that, I would hope that the Bridge Club would emphasise to their members to reverse in and come out in a forward gear, which is the safest way to do in any run-in within the whole of Perthshire and Kinrossshire. On the whole, with the condition to retain the gate with the full length of the coping stone as a condition, I would let this application go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Well, it's going to be two to one, I'm afraid, colleagues, but that still means I have a concern for conservation areas and the integrity of conservation areas. And of course, as we are now, the decision has been made, I think, Mr. Fogg, that we will allow this. They still have to apply for listed building consent. So I think on this one, so it's a 2 to 1.
Just for completeness then, would it be in your intention to have refused for the same reasons as the appointed officer?
Yes.
In which case the application is approved on a 2 to 1 majority, convener, but with a further condition, the purpose of which is to secure the retention of a full coping width on the left-hand side of the gate, as shown in the picture presently displayed.
Yep.
Can I just chat about another conditions I think that were chatted about last time, and one of them is the Bridge Club, the parking spaces, I believe, for parking, that they would supply the cost for the parking. There was a, what was given?
This is it. I think it's to do with the relocation of the street
Parking,
furniture
yes.
and the parking place. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to just ensure that the conditions that are related to that, that the Bridge Club will be responsible for the costs, and I think
Yes.
there's a
They
stand
will-
with flowers, stuff like that will be included.
They'll need separate, I don't know if it's RCC, but consent under the Road Scotland Act for the curb dropping and alterations. So that'll be a separate application that they will have to do.
That's right. Thank you.
Could I ask a further question which was referred to? There was a request from the neighbours that the strip of landscaping be retained as landscaping as opposed to anything else. Was that intended to be or not intended to be a condition also now that you've minded to grant?
Councillor Waters?
Yes.
You'd wish that to be a condition too?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think so, to be absolutely clear, could we run over the conditions just once more?
There may be further conditions that are to be applied as a matter of course. The two that have been specifically drawn to my attention, convener, would be a condition securing the retention of a full coping width as referred to, and a separate condition designed to retain the landscaping strip. But there may be one or two others. That is in normal course of time.
Just to be absolutely clear. So you're happy with that?
I'm happy, thank you.
So there, that's that matter concluded. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll swap you around again. Welcome back. Okay. So, welcome back, Councillor Wilson, and we'll proceed now to item 4.1. Can I ask if there's anybody here from this application? This is the erection of a dwelling house in principle at land 40 metres northwest of Trinity Gas Public Hall. Nobody here from that, right. Mr Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this matter?
Thank you, Convener. This is a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 40 metres northwest of Trinity Gas Public Hall, Trinity Gask. The application site comprises an area of farmland which is part of a much larger field. The plot is approximately 50 metres wide and 40 metres deep. Access is envisaged via the existing entry off the public road, There is a house curtilage with trees to the east, a farm access and some trees to the west, open farmland to the north, and the disused village hall to the south. The site slopes from north to south. I'll take you through the photographs now, but you might like to have page 11 onwards, provide you the location and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be the existing properties at Trinity Gask, access to the site, and then the site itself and its boundaries and context. So this is us approaching Trinity Gask, and the first property in Trinity Gask coming from, shall we say, the Perth side or the eastern side, which is Smithy Cottage. And then we'll progress down the road a little bit. From there, we get to the corner, and behind it is Law Hill. Behind the trees, that is, there's Law Hill Villa, which will appear in later photographs. And then go down the road a little bit further. We look into Law Hill Villa. And then down the road a little bit further, we pick up the hall, and then the old schoolhouse just beyond the hall. Moving on from that, we now have those two properties, but this is the access to those properties, which would also be the access to the application site. And then just a bit more of a detail, that's the frontage of Old Schoolhouse. Moving on from there, this is the access and the shall we say, the gable end of the hall. And on the back of that, we now have the ground rising slightly, and we have the application site itself, which backs onto the hall. So moving from there into the access, we're now in the access looking back to the junction we were just at, just to give you an indication of that orientation. And then, as it were, if we turn round in the same position and look in the opposite direction, we now look up the access road. And of course, we have the old schoolhouse on the left-hand side of the photograph, and we're just catching the boundary of the site on the right-hand side of the photograph. And as you'll note here, there's a bit of a difference in levels between the access and the application site. So moving up the road a little bit from there, this is approximately the position of the proposed shared from access point from that shared access into the application site, shown indicatively on your drawings. And again, moving further up the access road from there, we now take ourselves up to that western boundary. So we're standing in the ground associated with the rear of the old schoolhouse, which I say will appear in later photographs. But standing on that western boundary, we now move towards the right-hand side across the application site, which, as you can see, is part of the larger field beyond. So moving to the right, we have the upper part of the application site where it abuts onto the field. And we're just beginning to pick up the eastern boundary, which has Law Hill Villa and the garden ground and the trees in that garden ground there. And again, if we swing round again towards the right, we're catching the back of the village hall and of course the western boundary. Swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we've got the rear of the old schoolhouse and some of the land, say, associated with that property. Swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we look across the remainder of that land towards the open countryside and the field beyond the track. Stepping from there into the main field, this is a photograph looking down the field to the application site, and you see, I'm sure you can now pick up the village hall, the roof of it, and of course the schoolhouse as well. So moving down from there, just to show you the other boundaries in more detail, this is the east boundary and Law Hill Villa, and then the boundary directly onto the village hall. And then swinging to the right of that, we've got the boundary, that western boundary I mentioned before. So I'll leave you with that general photograph of the application site. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case. In response to reason 1, the proposal would share the use of the existing access onto the public road with Old Schoolhouse, Old School Room and the Community Hall to the east and west respectively. There are buildings in a backland position in this building group and in other building groups to the east and the west. In response to reason 2, the site is seen as having a suitable established boundaries and landscape features on 3 of its 4 boundaries. The proposal is seen as providing support to the fragile local community and its services and facilities, such as the dwindling church congregation and the disused village hall, a facet that is recognised in the Housing in the Countryside Guide, but has not been considered in the planning officer's assessment. The proposal would also simplify the shape of the field for modern farm machinery. Beg your pardon. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the proposal falls to be assessed against Local Development Plan Policy RDA3 and the Housing in the Countryside Guide, notably in relation to the prospective extension of a building group. As an extension of the building group, the assessment focuses on whether or not the site is defined by topography or well-established landscape features that would provide a suitable setting. While the site is seen as contained by the public hall to the south and the house and trees to the east, the track and planting to the west and open field to the north are not assessed as providing suitable and sufficient enclosure and containment. The character and building pattern of this small group of houses and non-residential buildings is formed by properties that front onto the public road. The proposal would introduce a backland development to the rear of the public hall, and as such is seen as being out of character with that building pattern. The proposal is not viewed as having a potential adverse impact on the setting of the adjoining listed building. In this case, there are no representations. There is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I want to go into the point of that Mr. Harrison raised, I think, both on the applicants and the planning service about containment of the site. And I'm on page 15 of the report, teamed up, I think, with page 11. But page 15 is a helpful aerial photograph. I'm looking at the boundary with Law Hill Villa, Mr. Harrison. It looks as if the landscaping that exists is within the curtilage of Law Hill Villa. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yes, part of its garden ground.
And
yes.
to the south, I think you said the south, there's the village hall.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if it's still in use? It's a kind of linear building along the length of the road.
Indeed, I mean, I think the applicant himself describes it as effectively being disused at the moment, and certainly it certainly appeared to be disused and not in use in terms of windows being open and other things.
And could we maybe go back to the photograph, please, where it looks up the lane from the village hall towards the site, if that's easy
right.
to...
If you'd like to stop me at the photograph you have in mind.
I think that one.
This one?
No, that one.
This
Thank
one.
You. No, the shared access one.
There's another one there.
Yeah. No, the one that says shared access down at the bottom.
Oh,
no,
right.
You've gone too far. That's it. These trees on the right, are they at the back of the village hall?
No, they're not really at the back of the village hall. I'm wondering whether they're caught in another photograph. Sorry. They're slightly beyond. You've got the birch tree here before you get to the Scots pines further on.
Right. So they're along the lane.
They're on the lane. They're just at that boundary where it's changing from the back of the village hall to the side of the application site. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's fine, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson, any questions? I just have one, again, maybe if we could look at page 11, just to be absolutely clear, of the papers, where I note there's a lots of blue and black lines. Just to be clear, that I understand the hall is is not used as a community hall. We're unsure whether it's disused. Is it in the ownership of the applicant along with the ground around about it, as far as we're aware?
Certainly that would, yes. The blue lines usually indicate other land in the applicant's ownership out with the application site, yes.
Right. That's fine. Thanks very much.
Could I ask one more?
Of course, Councillor Wilson. On you.
Just on the other point for refusal, the reason of creating backland development and parallel development, I'm on page 15 again, and I'm looking at the layout of Law Hill Villa. It's fairly clear, I think, Mr. Harrison, there's a number of buildings on that site. It's
well,
one property, but there seem to be a number of buildings there.
it seems to be a very extensive property. It
Yes.
certainly gives the impression of it being added to. Whether there is more than one property involved in the villa, for example, granny flats or other things, I'm really not clear, but it certainly seems to be a single curtilage and a single property.
Yes, and to the right of that, there appears to be a fairly large cluster of buildings as well. I know you've been on site and you didn't have a photograph of that, but I think there, as such, but there's a cluster of buildings.
Is this, when you say to the right of that?
Immediately to the right of
Smithy
Law-
Cottage?
Not immediately, but
Yes.
page
also,
15,
beg your pardon.
there's a gap.
There's a
and
gap, and
some
yes.
hedging and trees, and then there's another cluster of buildings. Yeah.
Yes, that's effectively, if I go back a bit.
Yeah. Okay, thank
so
you.
That's that group of buildings, Smithy Cottage. And its outbuildings, I think.
And you, Councillor?
Is there any evidence that Smithy Cottage is used, or is it disused?
It seems to be in the process of being restored at the moment. As you can see, there's a sort of a builder's bag in blue there. So there seems to be some works going on in the process of restoring it.
Thank you.
No more questions, colleagues? No, we're all set. Right. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation of the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
Convener, I'm satisfied with sufficient information to proceed today.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson.
Satisfied with the sufficient information?
I too am satisfied, colleagues. So we can move to debate and assess this case. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, Perth Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thanks, Convener. I find this application, and it's been helpful having the presentation, is a fairly finely balanced one. Whilst I can understand the reasons given for refusal, I think that the containment of the site, and particularly wanted to ask these questions, is one that there is a degree of containment of the site, certainly on the boundary with Law Hill Villa and with a hall. Whether it's used or disused at the moment is I think, beside the point. And there's also a degree of containment on the lane, although it's a bit thinner, but I think that would be capable of enhancement in a planting scheme. I acknowledge fully the planning officer's point that the western boundary is open to the field, and it's open to the field. That's just a statement of fact, although I think that also could be subject to landscaping. So whilst I consider the application does not totally conform with the local plan, that in regard to landscaping it conforms in part, and in my view there's sufficient landscaping to allow development. The second point for refusal about backland and parallel development, I think the scatter of buildings on each of the plots in Trinity Gask is such that we already have buildings that have outbuildings and others associated with them. And therefore there has created the building group as such, and everybody agrees as a building group, the building group as such is of a diverse nature, and development here would not detract from that, but I think would in fact assist in the process, as the applicant has said, of helping with the future viability of the village. We've seen a cottage that is already unused, and the village hall that appears to be unused. This is a community that looks to me of it needing some form of help and assistance, and this application might go towards that. So I would be prepared to approve the application, but we'll come to conditions, etc., in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm afraid I'll have to disagree with my colleague on this one. I agree with the officer that this is a backland development. There's no question about it. It's behind the hall. It doesn't marry up with any rest of the settlement at all. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that putting development behind the village hall, whether it's disused or not, would in any way enhance the area. Certainly, when it comes to the second reason for refusal, yes, I'm quite convinced that it could probably be landscaped to enclose it and make it a framework. But that is by the by. It is a backland development, and it's contrary to our policy. So I would uphold the officer's decision.
Thank you very much, Dean. Councillor Anderson, I'm on this occasion in agreement with you. I think the map on page, or the picture, this aerial photograph on page 15 to me says it all. This is most definitely backland development, and it is contrary to the local plan. So I am prepared to agree with the officer's decision with a couple of bits of tidying up, if I may. So, paragraph 1, I think we need to just call it the Perth Kinross local plan. And the same further down in reason 2, again, just the Perth Kinross local plan. But other than that, I think I and Councillor Anderson are happy to go with both the reasons for refusal. So quite happy with that, Mr. Ball? Yes. That's the decision made. So we move on now to item 4.2, which is the erection of a dwelling house on land 30 metres northwest of Nether Gothans Farm, McClure. Can I ask if there is anyone here from that? Thank you, sir. Can I ask your name, sir? Sam Mercer. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house at land 30 metres northwest of Nether Gothans Farm, McClure. The site is part of a field to the north of the existing farm cottage. Access would be off the public road and would be shared between the existing and proposed house. The house proposed is of an elongated plan form and single-storey height with wet dash render walls and a slate roof. And I'll take you through the photographs now, but you might like to have page 103 onwards, which provides you with a location plan and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching the site, the context of the site in relation to the existing buildings, and the landscape setting. So the first photograph here is showing us a view from the public road across the intervening field towards the two buildings that are there. The main cottage, as it were, on the left-hand side of the two buildings you see, and as you'll see in later photographs, the timber building on the right-hand side. So moving on from there, this is now standing in the access track to both of those properties. And if we go down the track, we approach Nethergotham's cottage as it is at the moment, and we're catching the corner of the application site to the north of the cottage. Swinging round to the left of that, we get the remainder of the application site shown approximately, and the sequence of photographs will now continue to swing round to the left to give you the landscape context a little more clearly. So this is now looking across the intervening field, just catching the corner of the application site. Again, swinging round to the left of that, we're looking back up towards the public road, which we've just come down in the photographs. Swinging round to the left of that again, we've got the main field looking across to the woodland beyond on that western side. And again, swinging round to the left of that photograph brings us all the way right back round to the cottages itself and the timber cottage. So moving up to the cottages itself, we now move to that rear elevation of the existing cottage that's in use. And we've got the back of the application site shown there, and then swinging down to the right of those, we get the main part of the application site, looking in a westerly direction, and then again, looking now in a northerly direction, we get the remainder of the application site. Moving on from that, this appears to be an extension to the cottage, which has been undertaken, albeit it doesn't appear to be in use at the moment as it's boarded up. But then we move on, swinging around slightly to the right of that, we look at that other elevation, as it were, the front or south-facing elevation of the existing cottage and its extension. Stepping back from that position, we step back into the field, as it were. We see the frontage of both the cottage, and of course we see the timber building as well, as timber cottage. So we're now going to go, as it were, round the cottages standing in the field to give you an indication of how they sit in the landscape. So we see both the extension to the existing cottage and the timber building, as it were, looking in an easterly direction from the field. Moving round a little bit further to the left, we see the gap between the extension on the existing cottage and the timber cottage. And again, moving a little bit again to the left of that photograph, we catch the extension in relation to the application site. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph of its position in the landscape. Turning first of all in summary of the applicant's case, Nethergotham's cottage has been uninhabited for many years. It is not seen as being capable of being renovated without rebuilding in its entirety. The planning officer's concerns seem to focus on the landscape framework being undefined. It is accepted that the buildings at this location are very open within the landscape. Consequently, landscape proposals have been submitted with the notice of review to assist the proposed house and the original farmhouse to achieve a level of visual containment within the wider landscape. The orientation and proximity of the original farmhouse relative to the existing timber building is not considered to be capable of being provided with satisfactory means of landscape containment. The reason for seeking to locate the house on the proposed site rather than the site of the existing timber building is to ensure privacy for both properties. It is envisaged that a house reflecting the style, materials and design of the existing house would be appropriate. Turning to the officer's report of handling in summary, the proposal seeks to build a house on the corner of a larger field lying to the north of the existing farmhouse. This is seen as a replacement for the abandoned dwelling lying to the south of the farmhouse. The proposal falls to be assessed in relation to the 6 categories of Local Development Plan Policy RD3 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide. Although there is no building group at this location, there is a former dwelling. Category 4 allows for the replacement of existing houses in certain circumstances. In this case, there is substantial evidence of the original building. However, a replacement is expected to be located on the established site with a good landscape setting and a good fit in the landscape with the existing site boundaries, which are capable of providing suitable enclosure. Any new house is also expected to be similar in its orientation and distance from the road, unless there is a better position within the landscape. The proposed house is not in a position, the proposed house is not in the position of the house which is seen as being replaced, and being in part of an open field with no effective visual containment, does not have a preferential position within the landscape. Also, the applicant's desire for improved residential amenity is not considered to be of sufficient weight to outweigh the landscape and siting failings of the proposed site. It is noted that the existing abandoned house is out with the application site. Although owned by the applicant, this is seen as making the control over any replacement more difficult in the event of planning permission being granted. The proposal itself does not raise any concerns regarding design or residential amenity matters. There are no representations, and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. Is the, not the abandoned house, but the other one in the group, I think it's described as a farmhouse or a farm cottage, is it presently occupied, or is it...
The house is presently occupied, although, as I mentioned in the introduction, there seems to be an extension on one side of the house which doesn't appear to be in use, if only in the sense that the windows are blocked up.
Yeah, that's what I noted by the pictures. That's why I asked the question.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm told by the person who occupies the house that there is only one property there, though.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, any questions?
Indeed, Convener, thank you. One or two questions. On page 95, Mr. Harrison, and just the top paragraph there referring to the existing abandoned building, which I think we've all called the wooden house. It clearly is not occupied. And
no.
I think there's a contention from the applicant that it's really unfit for purpose in the papers we've got. Could we go to, have you a picture of that particular one, either on its own or an associate? Yes. That would you consider that houses, or either of these houses, got any landscape containment, Mr. Harrison, at all?
Well, you're asking me to make your valued judgment for you.
No. I'm asking your professional opinion if there's any landscape framework there. It's not immediately obvious from the photograph.
No, indeed. The cultivation of the field effectively runs up as close as it can reasonably get to the properties.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. With regard to this issue about the abandoned dwelling being out with the planning application site, it's not a direct replacement. It looks as if the application to me is a one-for-one replacement, but having the house in a different place. We'll come to that in a minute. But is there any way of conditioning that the abandoned house, if we were minded to approve the application, would be demolished as part of the potential development, or is that out with our remit?
No, I think the officer is pointing out that there would be, should we say, an expectation that if the proposal has been put forward as a replacement house, that there would have been a reasonable expectation that the original house would be within the application site, and that we have a more direct relationship between the two things. We're told that the house you see here, the timber house that is in the applicant's ownership. It would be competent to have a condition, because it's within the applicant's ownership, to link the two things together. But I think it's more that the officer is quite correctly pointing out that it's not within the application site, so the relationship is not as direct as it might have been.
I understand that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Further to that, if I may just clarify, if we're being asked if we were minded to agree to the new house as a replacement to that one, and it's out with the site, and do we have any reason to believe that a further application to replace that cottage would not come along, or could not come along in future?
Well, it would
I'm
be,
asking you to speculate. I
you are asking me to
Mm.
speculate, because any applicant is entitled to make an application, of course. But if you were to make any works for the commencement of development on, shall we say, the new site, dependent on the removal of that property in its entirety, then you would have a degree of control in that context.
Thanks for that one. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within these papers and the presentation by our planning advisor? Or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
I'm satisfied with sufficient information today.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, satisfied to carry on.
I too am satisfied, colleagues. So I think we can assess this case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Anderson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, as one can see by these pictures, there's no landscape containment whatsoever in these cottages, and one has to remember that probably when these cottages were built, there would have been no consideration of that at that time. However, we've moved on from then, and I think it's better that the houses we build now, we give consideration to ensuring that they're more contained and not severe looking, like as one observed there, that the ploughshare's almost been up to the back door or the front door or whatever it is. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, there's no evidence of landscape containment if this additional house was built. So therefore, I would uphold the planning officer's decision to recommend refusal. That it's contrary to the relevant provisions of the development plan, and I don't see any reasons to move away from the development plan in this instance. So I would uphold the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. This is an interesting one because technically, of course, the planning officer has reported on the technicalities of the matter. But the site is interesting because there is no landscape containment at all. And you would wonder, Convener, if there was an application came in for the buildings that are there now, whether they would be approved or not. And the simple answer is there would be a recommendation from planning that they wouldn't be approved. However, they are there. And we've got a substantial stone-built house with an extension on it, which may or may not be fully occupied. And we've got an abandoned wooden house which no longer fit for purpose. The proposal is to have a replacement house, not on the exact footprint, but nearby and, in my opinion, in a slightly better location, pro rata the actual two houses. I think there's also the fact that an application gives an opportunity to create some landscape framework within it. And I would disagree with Councillor Anderson on this one. I think that there is the potential to approve this house. I find myself, while disagreeing with the conclusion of the planning officer, he's technically going through the criteria and ticking the box, as it were, on these. But I think there's a planning gain here. We get, if we can condition that the abandoned house is demolished and can condition landscaping, and we'll get advice to that in due course, Convener, but I'll wait and find out what you will think yourself.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. There's always a difficulty when your colleagues go first, that you have to make the final decision. And I find this a particularly difficult one because I do agree that there is no real landscape containment within that area. But I do have a concern that when we don't replace a house in the exact position, we leave the door open, as it were, to further development. And I think I did ask a similar question, but I maybe would ask again, if I may, Mr. Fogg. Can we condition that this is to be considered a replacement house, and that is it? It doesn't then become a building group, and you see where I'm going, and there are further applications. Because, I mean, I would see this in terms of pure arithmetic. You're knocking down what seems to be a fairly undesirable house, putting up quite a nice house in the same area. It's an area we drove past yesterday by chance to way to Blairgowrie, and I personally can see that making no real difference. But we do have to take cognizance of the provisions of a local development plan as well. So I'm looking really for an assurance that this would be, in effect, a one-off, if you see what I mean.
Convener, I don't think excuse me, I don't think I can go quite as far as giving you the assurance you're seeking. What I could say is that were you to approve this in accordance with policy as being an appropriate replacement of an existing house, that is a matter for which arguably the local development plan provides. What I would endorse the advice you got from Mr. Harrison earlier when he said you can't fetter the right of an applicant to come forward at a later date. If he chooses, and the obligation would then be on the planning authority to determine that based on the circumstances as they applied at that time. I would perhaps caution you against going too far about speculating, looking into the future. If you were satisfied that this could be justified in accordance with policy, it may fall to you to uphold the application and leave to others to decide the extent to which it did or did not comply at a later date, if the applicant did choose to come forward. But I don't think it would alter the fact that you would be approving this as a replacement of a property that currently is there that's no longer fit for purpose in perhaps a better location. And there's a limit to how much further you can be expected to go.
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Fogg, I'll consider that one for a moment, if I may.
I mean, if it helps, in some other circumstances, and in the past, I've seen situations where the planning authority has agreed with a developer to come forward with a Section 75 application by which he or she enters an obligation not to come forward with a further application. But bearing in mind the right now to have a Section 75 varied and appealed, I think that's not really a satisfactory approach, and I don't think that takes you much further forward. So I wouldn't be suggesting that as a clever solution.
No, right. Colleagues, have we any further points? Ms. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. Can we just, to follow on from that point, I'm on page 106 where there's a helpful wee coloured diagram that shows the existing farmhouse, the abandoned wooden cottage, and the replacement proposal. Whilst the replacement proposal is a bit of distance away from the existing cottage, I don't think it's too far away, and I think the argument is made within the papers that this would be a more appropriate location for a house rather than where the wooden house is at the moment. There's always a danger of precedent and a danger of, well, will there be another application? That's just something you've got to take on the chin, to be quite blunt, and accept that that is an option of the applicant. But I think if the applicant was keen to provide a direct replacement, that's the application we would have in front of us, and clearly they're not. I think the distance, and any proposal for anything else would be judged on its own merits, convener. That's how the system works. I think the fact that the replacement house is located in a different location and further away from the farmhouse actually gives you the opportunity to create a landscape setting, albeit it would be a limited one, for the proposed cottage, which is something that doesn't exist there at the moment at all. It's simply an open field, and I think that would actually add to the amenity both of the proposed house and the existing farmhouse.
Councillor Anderson? Right. I find this a particularly difficult one, because I agree mostly with most of what both my colleagues have said, which is not very helpful for coming to a conclusion. I'm also aware that we can't speculate into the future, so On this occasion, I think, given the landscape or the lack of landscape containment, and given the fact that the plan, to me, says replacement cottage and will be an improvement, I think on this occasion I will side with Councillor Wilson, given the conditions we would want, and go against the reasons for refusal on this occasion. So that would be 2-1 again.
Convener, I've heard the debate this morning, the concern that the applicant is held by his commitment to remove the existing timber house, and it's not part of the application site, but it is within his ownership, therefore it would be competent as a condition. And I take it, therefore, you'd be looking for a suspensive condition, perhaps to ensure that the house is demolished before any occupation of a replacement house. You have the choice, perhaps, of
absolutely,
it
yes.
being demolished before work start or simply before it's occupied. You might feel it's sufficient that it's demolished before the replacement house is occupied, rather than
I would personally like
work
to see it
start.
before work starts.
Before work start, right,
That would
okay.
make quite a definite commitment. And there's no dubiety about that whatsoever, because demolishing it is clear before any other work starts. And just while I'm not quite on my feet, but speaking, is it competent to have a condition that deems that the planning authority would need to have a landscaping plan for the proposed house that would be submitted for the approval of the planning service? There's a wording, as a standard wording of that it would require a landscaping proposal. I suppose that would only, Mr. Fogg, affect the new house and wouldn't affect the farm house.
Yes.
The proposed house, yeah.
Could I come in there? Yes. I'm conscious that you actually, first of all, on page 99 have a drawing, an additional drawing, which has been submitted since the planning application, which shows a degree of landscaping and also refers to a returning of an area to agricultural land. I know you've not touched on the latter part, but just dealing with the landscaping aspect, I'm conscious that the proposal shown is effectively within the garden ground of the application site for the house. If you're talking about integration into the landscape, you may want to consider whether the landscaping is out with the curtilage of a dwelling house, where people would, shall we say, normally have an entitlement to include or take away landscaping, and have a, shall we say, a more robust form of landscaping than the proposal shown indicatively in this drawing.
Councillor Wilson?
I don't want to be judgmental about what's proposed on page 99, but I think that would be basic, is how I would describe it. And I would be looking for a much more enhanced landscape plan that, given the ownership, because I think all of the land around is within ownership of the applicant, that certainly within the garden ground, to an element of landscaping. But I think in order to achieve what I think all of us in the room would want, to improve the level of landscape, that this plan as a basis with enhancement out with the actual boundary would be appropriate in this occasion. There's a I think a standard condition about landscaping to be established and planted and maintained to the satisfaction of the planning authority, I think is one that springs to mind. There will also be basic conditions on any new development, Mr. Harrison, that the planning service normally implement, such as start in 3 years and other basic conditions, but I presume these would apply to this if we were to proceed.
Can I just interject there?
Yeah.
I think that is it not the landscaping plan is within the red line of the application? I don't think we can go outside that with a condition of landscaping.
We can, convener, but it's within the applicant's control, so there's a little flexibility here.
Right.
So, colleagues, are we content? Yeah, you're not content, just do one. Just to be absolutely clear again, Mr. Fall, can we just revise the conditions for this one? Councillor Wilson and I are of the opinion that we should go against the refusal and allow it?
Yes. There are some standard conditions that one expects to see where a residential dwelling secures consent in a full application. But in addition to that, reference this morning has been made to your wish for a suspensive condition, the effect of which is to secure the removal of the existing substandard timber-framed house that's shown on the photograph now. And in addition to that, reference has been made to your desire for a landscaping condition to secure, insofar as practicable, satisfactory landscaping of the site. And I've got that. I would prefer not to give you the exact wording because I'm not familiar with it. Those are the two specifics. I don't know if Mr. Harrison has got further matters he wants to clarify with you now.
It's only one additional matter. There was reference to an archaeological matter which should be addressed in the condition as well, if you're minded to grant consent.
Yes. Yeah, for completeness, I did notice in the standard consultation there's no requirement for an education contribution here in view of the limited capacity of the primary school.
So the decision is to go against the refusal. Thank you. Right, colleagues. If we move on now to item 4.3, which is an extension to a dwelling house, Wester Ballandine Farm Cottage in Sture in Perth. Can I ask if there's any agent or applicant here for that one? No. Right. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce the application for review?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the extension of a dwelling house at Wester Ballandine Farm Cottage, East in Sture. The proposed extension concerns the addition of a conservatory onto the eastern gable end of this semi-detached single-storey traditional cottage. The cottage is one half of a Category B listed building. Now, I'll take you to the photographs now, but you might like to have pages 141 and 142 and 151 onwards, which provide you with location plan, site plan and drawings of the extension. The sequence of the photographs will be the front of the house and its neighbours and the position of the extension. So this is us standing in the public road, looking at the gable of the house, where you see the indication of the arrow in blue showing the position of the conservatory extension and its relationship to the immediately adjoining property Cruachan. And going, as it were, up the public road a little bit from there, we have the front of the house itself, the red lines giving a general indication of the application site, and as you can see, it's one half of the semi-detached properties. So going a little bit further up the road, we have the other half, if I can call it that, of the semi-detached cottage. This is the western half, as it were. And it's a bit clearer in this photograph, some of the detailing referred to in the report in terms of the lattice windows and the exposed rafters. The others were more in shade. So we go back again a little bit. We do still pick up the lattice windows and exposed rafters and the general position of the extension, as I say, on that gable end beyond the hip. Just give a little more of an indication how that lies, the position of the extension, and similarly the position of the extension as seen from the public road. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the golden oak rather than white UPVC framing for the conservatory has been chosen as it is seen as being sympathetic to the red sandstone walls and the original features of the listed building. The style, scale and form of the conservatory, including the extensive use of triple glazing to minimise walling, is also seen as preserving and enhancing the architectural features of the building. It would also provide physical protection to the entire external wall of the eastern gable and living space for the applicant's physically disabled wife. This manufacturer has been chosen because their products are seen as being of high quality. The proposal is seen as similar to others in the locality. Turning in summary to the officer's report of handling, the red sandstone walls, slate roof, diamond lattice windows and cantilevered eaves with exposed rafters of the building are viewed as constituting a vernacular design and materials that is characteristic of a Victorian rural cottage. In this context, the golden oak UPVC materials and lean-to form and design of the conservancy with a rendered base course is assessed as contrasting harshly with the existing cottage. The conservatory is viewed as a standardised modern product that is inappropriate for the historic listed building. In this case, there has been one representation expressing concern regarding potential overlooking and the design of the extension not being of an appropriate quality and materials. There is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Colleagues, were any questions of officers? Councillor Wilson?
I have no questions.
Councillor Anderson?
No questions.
I too have no questions. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within these papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson?
Happy to proceed.
Right, Councillor Wilson?
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. We're unanimous with that. And so we will move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us up?
Thanks, Convener. First of all, although there's no request for a site visit, I'm conversant with Ballandine since I was brought up just along the road. This is a particularly attractive cottage and particularly attractive group of houses. And I think, to be blunt, it's unfortunate that we have before us an application that doesn't reflect the character of the building and the building group. I think it's disappointing. I'm in total agreement with the recommendation for refusal, and I think that there are other solutions to this. Mr. Fogg will wriggle slightly when I say this, but I think the applicant needs to come back with a better solution.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Yes, this time I will concur with my colleague. I don't see any reason from going against the recommendation of the officer in this case. I think it's a very sensitive area, and the conservatory, in my mind, wouldn't be a suitable. This wouldn't be a suitable building for a conservatory to be added to. And that's about it.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Well, I think we're unanimous on this occasion. As Councillor Wilson says, it's a particularly attractive building. It's sometimes when we find buildings are listed, we can be a bit surprised, but on this occasion you can see why it's listed, and it would be wholly inappropriate, as it says in the reasons refusal, to put on a conservatory of this nature. So I think we're all unanimous, Mr. Fogg, that we would refuse. And I think, as I look at the reasons on page 133, I'm quite happy with the wording on both reason 1 and reason 2. So on this occasion, we'll be unanimous with that bold the refusal.
Agreed.
Okay, agreed. So we move on now to item 4.4, alterations to a dwelling house in Lugierate, Pitlochry. Can I ask if there is anybody here for this application? Hope we come to you all at some point, you know. There's nobody here from this one. Yes. Can I ask Mr. Harrison to introduce this application for review?
Yes, thank you, Convener. It's a detailed planning application for the alteration and extension of a dwelling house at Laganree, Lugierate by Pitlochry. The proposal concerns the erection of a box-style dormer on the rear elevation of the detached traditional cottage. The cottage has an elevated position above the public road passing through Logie Rate. You might like to have page 170 onwards, which provides you the location plan and site plan and also drawings of the extension. The general sequence of the photographs is the site as seen from the public view, the frontage, then the gable, and then the rear elevation. So this is us, as it were, standing, looking up towards the cottage from the public road, the cottage being beside the red car you see there, and you can see it's within the 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, and this is the access to the cottage immediately in front of you as well. So, as it were, moving into the site a bit more, this is the frontage of the existing cottage and includes the northern gable, as it were. And just to give you, shall we say, a more direct indication of the frontage and more of a detail of the existing form of dormer and its scale on the frontage of the cottage. Moving on from that, we have the gable, that's the north gable of the property. And I've just given an indication of the outline of the proposed box dormer from that aspect. And moving on from there, this is the slightly sunken area immediately adjacent to the rear wall of the cottage. And then moving into the garden ground at the back of the cottage, we have the position of the proposed dormer extension. This is an indicative outline of it, obviously shown in yellow there. So I'll leave you with that general photograph of the frontage of the cottage. Turning to the applicant's case, in summary, the existing accommodation at first floor level in the cottage is within the pitched roof space. It lacks sufficient headroom and safe stair access to meet current building standards. The proposed dormer would allow both bedrooms to have 2/3 of the floor space at full headroom. It would also enable a small shower room to be provided at this level. At present, there is only bathroom facilities on the ground floor level. It is necessary to extend from just below the ridge and off the wall head to secure these improvements. It is not considered that the officer's report has provided an explanation of the adverse impact on visual amenity in circumstances where the nearest houses are between 60 and 150 metres away and the rear elevation is hardly visible from the A827. Examples of other rear box dormers running out from the ridge, up from the wall head and occupying almost the full width of the building have been approved recently by the council, and these are referred to and illustrated in the applicant's papers. Any such impact is seen as being outweighed by the benefits of providing the improved standards of accommodation. A three-dimensional illustration has also been included with the notice of review papers, and these are seen on page 168. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, this traditional stone and slate cottage with gable chimney stacks and roof space dormers to the front is seen as having some architectural merit. Notwithstanding the existing 2 dormers to the front of the cottage, it is recognised that the bedrooms in the roof space of the cottage have particularly low ceilings. The proposal would extend some 3 metres up from the wall head and is only marginally set down from the ridgeline. At some 9.5 metres long, it extends the full length of the building with the exception of being set in about 0.5 metre at each gable end. It would be clad externally in Siberian larch and would have double glazed windows in white UPVC. Local Development Plan Policy PM1B Part C concerning placemaking indicates that, and I quote, the design and density should complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. The design, scale and massing of the dormer are assessed as failing to harmonise with the proportions and appearance of the host building and, as an extension, is not subservient to the host building. although the extension would not be readily visible from public viewpoints, the proposal is seen as destroying the appearance and character of the cottage and would appear visually dominant in the wider landscape setting. It is suggested that while this proposal is not considered to accord with local development plan policies, a lesser and more sympathetic proposal may be acceptable. In this case, there are no representations and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for officers? Councillor Wilson? Oh, sorry, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I think I probably know the answers, but I'll just ask for clarification. I take it this cottage isn't listed.
No, there's no suggestion that it's actually listed. No, it's
not
unlisted.
in a conservation area.
And it's not in a conservation area. No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. I'm on page 168, first of all, that Mr Harrison referred to in his presentation. And the lower of the two representations there. Mr Harrison, could you tell us about the status of that? That's presented by the applicant. Is that a montage, or is it a sketch, or I'm not quite sure what the technical expression is to use to describe it.
I think I would maybe describe it as an illustration, albeit that he's seeking to provide a representation of the proposal in a three-dimensional form, as it were, to illustrate what are, shall we say, the actual application drawings, which are on page 171 onwards, and probably in this case most notably page 172.
Well, thank you. That takes me neatly to page 172.
Oh, right.
And up in the right-hand corner of that A4 page, it looks to me as if the box dormer proposed is higher than the illustration, as you called it, on page 168. In fact, it looks as if it's almost at ridge height.
Yes, I mean, in simple terms, if you're looking for a point of reference, on page 168, the flat roof of the dormer, as it were, comes in just at the bottom of the chimney head, yeah. Whereas on the 172, it's, shall we say, cutting into the chimney head to some extent.
Yes, and also on the left-hand side of that page, the southeast elevation, I think, or the northeast elevation, showing the box dormer full on, as it were.
Yes.
It appears there to be more dominant than I say appears to be because they're not directly related, these two, but appears to be more dominant than the illustration 168. Is that
yes, I think what you're drawing attention to is the difference between, as you say, an illustration and what is the, if you like, the application drawings, yeah, as such.
Okay, thank you.
The application drawings obviously would take precedence in considering, yeah, these things.
Mr Harrison, you made reference in your presentation to we're always very careful as members of this board not to offer advice to applicants, but there was a suggestion that a slightly less bulky design might be acceptable. Would I be right in thinking that the illustration on page 168 would be the sort of thing I had in mind rather than the actual plans further on in the papers? Or am I asking you to speculate?
To be quite candid, I think you are asking me to speculate because I just simply don't know what's in the officer's mind in making that comment.
Right, it was an unusual phrase for us to hear because we don't normally offer,
yes, I think
advice. You know?
Without reading too much between the lines, I think what the officer is saying is this is, shall we say, the largest extension, and obviously, understandably, the applicant is seeking to provide as much accommodation as he can for both bedrooms and to include the if you like, the bathroom facilities as well. Obviously, if there was a decision to either reduce the extent to the 2/3 floor space or to possibly even omit some of the extension, a lesser extension might be possible, I think is what he's really alluding to.
And then I think further, maybe a question more for you, Mr. Fogg, than you, Mr. Harrison. My question would be, if we were minded to allow this, we can only allow the proposal that's before us.
Yes.
We can't condition a smaller proposal.
No.
All done with the questions, colleagues? Yes. Right, so, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Wilson?
Happy to proceed.
Right, and I too am happy to proceed with this one. So we'll move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Anderson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, and the Perth Kinross local development plan, and all our relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thank you, Convener. I can sympathise with the applicant because it made reference here that they want to bring their an extension to make the cottage into the building standards, and that's perhaps why there's been a comment from the planning officer that there could be possible something coming forward, but we're not speculating on that. We're actually looking at what, to me, is one of the most, the mass of this dormer is just, I can see why this was refused. It is far too big and bulky in scale compared to this cottage, and I would uphold what the officer has said for his reasons of refusal.
Thanks so much indeed, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson?
Convener, I previously said about the cottage at Ballindine, it was a particularly attractive. This is an attractive wee cottage as well. It is what it is. It's a wee house. And unfortunately, it only has a limited amount of accommodation. I can completely empathise with the applicant's desire to have a bit more space in the bedrooms, especially if you're any taller than I am. And I'm conscious I've got two gentlemen who are taller than me immediately to my right. So I can understand that, and people want to make it into a more substantial home. However, I think that the total bulk, and Councillor Anderson used massing, I've used bulk of what is proposed, is just too large and unbalances the house, I think, in design terms. And if it were, and we're not here to speculate any more than Mr. Harrison is, but if it were of the order of what is indicated 168, I think I certainly would be more sympathetic. But what presented to us is larger than that, and I reluctantly but firmly go along with the recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I too am in agreement with both my colleagues. It's easy to see on page 169, you can have some sympathy for the amount, the roof height available. It would probably be fine for you, Councillor Wilson, to say, but Councillor Anderson and I would struggle in that sort of height. But I think that there may be other solutions, I think. But on this occasion, I think it's just too big and bulky, and I would have to agree with my colleagues and agree with the reason for refusal. Quite happy with that, Mr. Fogg?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll go with that one. So we move on now to item 4.5, which is the erection of 4 dwelling houses, 2 garages and associated works on land 45 metres south of Hillcrest, Maryborough, Kelty. Can I ask if there is an applicant or agent for that item here? Can you identify yourself, please? Right, thank you. Can I ask you, Mr. Harrison, to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the erection of 4 houses and 2 garages and associated works at land 45 metres south of Hillcrest, Maryborough, Kelty. The site is currently part of a field. a mix of 2 single and 2 1.5-storey houses of contemporary design served by private access is envisaged. A single and double garage is also proposed. The houses will be finished externally in timber effect boarding and white render walls with grey concrete tiled roofs. And you might like to have page 247 onwards, which provide you with the location plan, the site plan and drawings of the houses. The general sequence of the photographs are going to be the context of the site in the immediate landscape and in relation to Hillcrest, views from the front and then the back of the site after that. So this is us on, shall we say, the public road, slightly further south of the application site at Maryborough. We have, you can probably just make out from the car parking, most of the housing on the left-hand side of the road as we're looking in that direction. But this is starting to show you some of the fields on the right-hand side of the road there. So swinging slightly to the right of that photograph, we catch land lying to the south of the application site. This is the adjoining land, and of which there's a burn passing through it, which is referred to in the papers, of course. And just to give a little more of an indication of that burn itself. So moving to the right of that photograph again, we start to come to the paddock, which is immediately abutting the application site, I say on that southern side. And then a little bit further down the road again, slightly to the right, we have the application site itself. We make out the stable building there, and past that and partly through the trees, we have Hillcrest, which will appear in later photographs too. So moving on from that, that's looking in a northerly direction, of course, still standing on the public road. We move down the road a little bit, and this is part of the application site. And then swinging round to the right of that, we have the, shall we say, the central part of the application site. As you can see, the difference in the landform here, the land rises up to the M90, and there's a dip in the land as well within the application site. And then swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we get the remainder of the application site and Hillcrest itself. And you'll see in this photograph that the application site extends slightly further beyond the boundary of the curtilage of Hillcrest. Moving on from that, just to give you a detail of the frontage of Hillcrest as it faces onto that boundary of the application site. And then moving on from that, again, just to give you more of an indication, the front area of the application site at the moment includes the small area of planters and a bench before you get into the actual field. And then swinging round from that southeastern corner, slightly to the left, we look up the boundary. You see the back of the stable building there, and there seems to be a dry ditch of sort, at least it's dry at this time of year, on that southern boundary. Moving up that boundary, as it were, into the application site, we look back down the ditch. This is us looking down to the public road, as it were. Of course, you've got the paddock on that right-hand side now. Swinging round to the left of that photograph, we get the body of the application site, and I've superimposed the dotted yellow line there, which represents in indicative form the boundary of the settlement as shown in the current local development plan. And as you can see, the application site extends beyond that. The area beyond that is, of course, enjoys the outline planning consent. Swinging round to the left of that photograph, we see the remainder of the upper field as it slopes up towards the M90. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, planning permission in principle was first granted for housing in 2012 and then renewed again in 2015. A detailed application for 5 houses in 2017 was refused. This proposal for 4 houses also reduced the scale of 2 of the houses and increased the amenity space and parking provision. A noise impact assessment and drainage data was also submitted with the current application. From communications, the applicant expected planning approval to be given for the proposal. Regarding local development plan policies on placemaking, the design of each proposed plot is unique and a sense of identity is seen as secured through the shared design and the cohesive grouping of buildings and external finishes and colours, all of which are considered to suit this countryside setting. The slope of the site is accommodated by the buildings to the rear being single-storey bungalows so that ridge lines are consistent with the houses to the front. Regarding the local development plan residential areas policy, it is considered that the village of Maryborough would be enhanced and not diminished by this proposal in terms of the house designs and layout and its relationship with adjoining properties. Drainage and possible flooding and noise considerations have been addressed, and there are no objections from any statutory consultees. Turning in summary to the officer's report of handling, the site benefits from an in-principle consent for residential development, even though approximately 25% of the site extends beyond the current settlement boundary of Maryborough. The 4 plots vary in size between some 550 and 780 square metres. Rear garden areas range from some 150 to 200 square metres. While the proposed houses are seen as being of relatively high quality and of suitable materials, the layout is assessed as an overdevelopment of the site with insufficient amenity space, particularly in relation to plots 3 and 4. In this context, the development of 4 houses is not seen as respecting the prevailing character of Maryborough. While the building on plots 1 and 2 occupy some 21% of their areas, plots 3 and 4 occupy some 26 and 35% of their areas respectively. Due to the sloping nature of the site, which falls some 3.5 metres, a cut and fill method with retaining walls is proposed to provide flatter areas of garden ground. The development is seen as being capable of being accommodated within the wider landscape context. The proposal is not seen as creating concerns regarding overshadowing or loss of privacy for other houses. It is noted that the prospective impact of noise on the proposed houses from the M90, which lies some 90 metres away, is assessed as being below levels that would be a source of concern. Original concerns regarding surface water drainage are considered to have been addressed through the assessment of the further information. In conclusion, notwithstanding the technical matters that have been or can be addressed, the proposal is viewed as being in conflict with local development plan, placemaking and residential areas policies. Turning to representations, 10 letters of representation have been received, including one from the Cleash and Blairandom Community Council. These mainly express concern regarding the proposal not complying with the local development plan, the overdeveloped scale, density and character of the proposal having an adverse impact on the locality, and technical shortcomings regarding access, drainage and flooding. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I'm on page 248, which looks like an extract of an OS map, I think. And on the left-hand side there, Mr Harrison, there's a blue line. Is that the wee ditch that we saw?
I've assumed that's the,
yep.
yes, which is maybe dry sometimes and
that's
has water in it
proposed.
sometimes.
If we look at the layout diagram in 249 immediately, in the next page, that's proposed for retention.
It certainly suggests that, yes.
Does that form part of any drainage system or SUDS or?
It seems to, if you like, my impression is it picks up should we say, the slope down from the M90, particularly the adjoining land. As you can see it, as it were, it turns the corner and goes round the back of the paddock. And it seems to, I'm assuming, have a culvert which takes you under the road which joins up with the burn on the opposite side of the road, which I showed in the photographs.
Could I just ask the paddocks on the left?
It's on the left-hand side.
Page 246, the paddock is where the letters, the numbers 249 are.
249, yes. Yep. It's on the left-hand side of that as you look at the drawing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson, any questions from you?
Just for a bit of clarity, I take it the yellow dotted line there is the settlement area,
Yes,
and that is defined by the LDP.
yes.
Is that correct?
It basically runs from the corner of the application site diagonally across the application site to the corner of Hillcrest property.
Right, thank you.
I have no questions, Mr. Anderson. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning officer, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson?
I think we've got a voluminous amount of information, largely supplied by the applicant or their agent, which I found helpful, and I think we have sufficient information.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, happy to proceed.
Yes, I too am happy to proceed. So we'll assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thanks, Convener. Well, the first thing is this has been identified as a housing site. There's a permission in principle. The question isn't about that. It's a question about the layout and the number of units. And I think that's where we have a difficulty, because there's a clear difference of opinion between the applicants who have made a submission for 4 units, and they're substantial units, and the planning service who I think would I'm not reading too much into this, but prefer less. So therefore we have a difficulty in that we have a difference. But we've got to judge what's before us today. We can't say, well, we like 2 houses or we like 3 houses. We've got an application for 4. One of the key issues for me is the layout and the amount of available amenity space for the houses, especially the rear 2. And I think there's ample reference to that in the planning officer's report and comments. So again, all of these things aren't always, planning is always more grey than black and white, Convener, as you know. But on balance, I would need to go with a report on this one. And I think there needs to be further discussion between the planning service and the developer to see what might be acceptable in that particular location.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Convener. When I read this over the festive period, I actually went down to have a look, because when you first saw sort of 26%, 35%, you looked at it and you thought, well, you know, that's not a... I at first didn't think it was a big ask. If that had meant the amenities at the front of the houses was comfortable, I would have been quite happy with that. But going down and seeing how constrained the site was, and looking at the plans and realising that even taking in that a bit, it still doesn't make these houses a comfortable fit in an area that has, in principle, planning permission. But I'm afraid it's trying to, you know, put a quart into a pint pot, and it just doesn't work. And then when you drive along and see the rest of Maryborough, there's nothing vaguely similar to that. It's a traditional little settlement, village, whatever you want to call it. It's got big houses, little houses. They're all different, but they're all got a more traditional feel to it. And I think to put 4 houses in a block in there would not enhance that village appearance or settlement appearance of Maryborough. So therefore I have to back the officer's refusal on this one.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Anderson. Well, we are unanimous again. I would have to back the reasoned refusal as well. Whilst there is no doubt it is a potential housing site, this is overdevelopment, as the officer says in his reasons for refusal. So I think we're unanimous again, Mr. Fogg, that we would go for refusal. And the only thing I would add, perhaps, would be in reason one, it's because we have a duty here as councillors to uphold the local development plan. It's contrary to policy PM1, but I think PM1A, I would say, and also certain bits of B. So I think if we could add in there PM1A and B items B and C. I don't know if it might be appropriate, Mr. Harrison, for you to articulate
Well,
B and C just for our benefit.
This is PM1B part.
B and C,
B and
I would
C.
suggest, would be appropriate addition.
For maybe just to recap what they stand for, Part B says, consider and respect site topography and any surrounding important landmarks, views or skylines, as well as the wider landscape character of the area. I'm assuming you're referring to the topographical aspect of that. And Part C is the design and density should complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. And again, I suspect it's the density aspect in relation to overdevelopment you're referring to.
Yeah, that'd be fine. So I just check whether my colleagues are both agreeable with that addition.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Right, so that's that one agreed. I think as previously announced, I think we'll take a half-hour break now, and we will be back in action for 1 o'clock. So thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We're ready to go for the rest of the afternoon, and we'll start straight off with item 4.6, which is the review of condition 1 of planning consent, alterations and erection of gate piers and a gate at Craignish, Blair-Adam, Kelty. Is there anybody here from that application, can I ask? No. Right. So, Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to take us through the application?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for alteration and extension of gate piers and gates at Craignish, Blair-Adam by Kelty. This application seeks the review of condition 1 of the planning permission granted for this proposal. I will just take you through the photographs now. This is the housing opposite the application site on the main road. And as you note in this photograph, there are stone walls and entrances on that side of the road as well. And you can obviously note the height of those, as well as a certain amount of timber fencing on one side as well. So on the opposite side of the road, we have the application site itself. And again, you notice a very low stone wall along the frontage of it. And if we go down the road slightly and look directly in at the entrance, we have, shall we say, the original, shall we almost say, I would say, farm gate style entrance with a slight raising of the wall on each side of it, but basically a freestanding timber gate entrance at the moment. And to the left of that, we have the adjoining property with that gate entrance, which is closed. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the frontage. Turning to the applicant's case, this proposal revised a similar proposal which had been refused previously. It removed previously proposed fencing and reduced the scale of the gate feature. The officer's report of handling in assessing and approving this proposal is seen as misunderstanding the design and materials of the proposed gates. The report refers to the entrance gates being in metal. The applicant indicates that solid timber gates were envisaged and that this was understood by the officer that had been previously dealing with this proposal. Since granting planning permission, the planning services indicated that a further planning application would be required if the applicant wished to install timber rather than metal gates. The applicant is seeking a review of Condition 1 of the planning consent to allow the gates to be in timber. Condition 1 states, the development hereby approved must be carried out in accordance with the approved drawings and documents unless otherwise provided for by conditions imposed by this decision notice. In support, reference is made to a number of fences and gates in the vicinity, and these are illustrated by photographs and a plan contained in their submission. Timber gates are seen as being in character with others in the locality and would provide the applicant with a degree of privacy and security. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, in describing this proposal in comparison to the previous submission, the report of handling states, and I quote, the latest plans indicate that the new setback entrance will be less substantial in nature, comprising 2.5 metre high stone gate piers with a set of double 5 metre wide metal gates. In making the assessment, attention is drawn to the placemaking policies of the local development plan, which seek to ensure that all new development is compatible with its surroundings and does not result in any adverse impact. In this context, the revised proposal, which changed the material from timber to metal gates, were viewed as less visually intrusive and more open and in keeping with the character of the hamlet, and as such were supportable. It is also noted that the road frontage of this property forms the boundary of the Loch Leven and Lomond Hills Special Landscape Area and is very open to public view. In this case, there are no representations and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Harrison. Colleagues, are any questions for Mr Harrison? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. There's coming from many years ago from a farming background and landscaping, solid timber, are we actually talking about, because the mention of privacy, are we actually talking about a close boarded timber gate, or are we talking about a farm style timber gate, which if you look back at the pictures is not for privacy, it's really more for landscape reasons.
This really comes down to the interpretation of the drawings. The applicant, if you turn to page 403, which, to be clear, is illustrating what the applicant is trying to portray. It is not the application drawings. This is a drawing which has been put in subsequent to the proposal. The application drawing is actually the previous page 402, again, just to be clear about that. But it would appear certainly the applicant's intention, if I can put it that way, is a solid close-boarded gate.
Thank you for that clarity.
Councillor Wilson, any questions from you?
No questions.
No questions from me either, I don't think. So we can go to the preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
Yes. Councillor Wilson. Agreed. I too am happy to proceed. And we'll proceed to assess the case and move to debate. And I'll start things off. Having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I'll start this one off. So colleagues, this was mercifully thin papers for this one, but nonetheless, I was left possibly confused as to why it had come to us in this form. And perhaps, I don't wish to put words in your mouth, Mr Harrison, but it seems to me that the applicant wishes to have solid timber gates, and it seems to me that there is no reason why they shouldn't have that, but that's not implicit in the papers before us. Would that be correct? Or if we vary the condition, we would need to vary the condition here. They have not asked for that condition to be varied, which would allow that.
Yes, as I read out the condition itself, there's some difficulty, if I can put it that way, in completely understanding the nature of the appeal, in connecting the desire of the applicant to have timber gates and the condition which has been appealed, which is in simple terms saying that developments to be carried out in relation to the approved plans. The approved plans themselves imply but don't specify timber gates, which I think is the root problem. They haven't actually annotated the plan, which is the application plan, as opposed to the more recent one, to say there will be timber gates.
Would I be right in thinking, pardon Mr. Fogview, that we can specify that as a condition in any decision if we were minded to make a decision that way? Yeah. So I think, colleagues, given that advice, I'd be happy to hear, obviously pleased to hear what you have to say, but I feel we can get the result that everybody wants with the solid timber gates by not agreeing the conditions for refusal, and by using the appropriate conditions get the answer that we want. So, Councillor Anderson, have you anything further to add?
It is rather grey and confusing, but I would say that if someone wishes to have a solid timber gate, rather than to give them more privacy, because metal gates, if one was to make a metal gate in such a way that one couldn't see through it, it would be extremely heavy and unwieldy. So I don't see the issue if one wants privacy in having a timber gate, and that's my view on it. I don't know how this process has came about. It does seem rather confusing, but if this is what the applicant is wanting, and I don't know exactly what the problem is, and you would have thought it could have been discussed without coming in front of us. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson?
I concur with Councillor Anderson's point. I'm surprised this is before us. I would have thought that between the applicant and the planning service they could have sorted this out. However, we are where we are, and we just need to crack on with it. I think we should take a decision that will allow wooden gates to be provided and the wall to be altered, but we should condition that appropriately. And we need some advice from Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg how we might actually articulate that. But I support in principle what you've said.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. So I think with your help, Mr. Harrison, and your help, Mr. Fogg, we would agree to, or we are all agreed that we should allow this to go ahead, because the end result will be acceptable. So what we would need to do, as I understand it, would be to delete the first reason for refusal and to allow it with appropriate conditions as to the nature of the gate or the materials used in the gate. And then as regards to the second reason, I think I would manage without the first bit of a sentence and just have that second condition. I would agree that all proposed external finishing materials should remain the same. I think we could delegate, Mr. Harrison has to say, we could delegate to yourselves the appropriate wording. Mr. Harrison.
So if I understand you correctly, the application is in relation to condition 1, and you're seeking to delete the current condition 1 completely and replace it with another condition which enables the applicant to install wooden timber gates, and to clarify that point.
Yes, I think that's
right. And the reason for the condition, I'm assuming if you're deleting both the condition and the reason for one would presumably be in relation to the same reason for two?
Yeah.
Right. And did you say you're content to, if you like, delegate the detailed wording of a condition to that effect to myself and Mr. Fogg?
Yeah, I think we're content with that, Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, agreed.
I think we agreed that, because I think the important thing we're agreed on is that the end result will be the same as if it had been done in a different way, shall we say. So they'll end up with the solid timber gate.
Okay.
Quite happy with that one, Jeff? Yes. Right. Okay. So we now move on to item 4.7, erection of a dwelling house on land 300 metres southwest of Nether Allen, Blackford. Can I ask if there's any applicant or agent here for that one? Can you identify yourself?
I'm the agent, Percy Walton, beside me are the applicants, Mr.
Thanks so much. Welcome. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to take us through this application? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It's a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house at land 300 metres southwest of Nether Allen by Blackford. The proposed 5-bedroom, single-storey detached house would be located on a site extending to approximately 1 hectare. The house plan would measure some 25 metres long by 10 metres deep. It would be positioned slightly below and some 35 metres from the A9 dual carriageway. Access would be shared with the recent housing development and the farm. The application site also shows access being via an underpass to the east to serve the southbound carriageway. You might like to page 455 onwards, which will provide you with the location plan and the site plan. The general sequence of the photographs I'll show involves the existing housing development, the present farmhouse, the adjoining house, the site and the context and the landscape, and the new steading and the dual carriageway. So just to take it in that order, this is the underpass at the far end of the application site, which would allow access in due course to be taken under the dual carriageway in order to, as I would say, gain access to the southbound carriageway. So as it were, turning round from that, we now look along down to that underpass and turning round completely from that, and this is obviously showing some of the acoustic fencing which is there at present, and of course there's reference to acoustic fencing in relation to this application as well. Turning round from that, we look in the opposite direction down, I say, the access which is part of the application site and along that frontage of acoustic fencing next to the trunk road. Swinging slightly to the right of that photograph, we have the access. You're just starting to take in the farmhouse and some of the new development, and this is us generally looking in a western direction. Swinging round to the right of that photograph again slightly, again we have the farmhouse a little more clearly this time, and some of the new development that's in the process of being erected. Going up the access road again, moving in a slightly westerly direction, we come to the farmhouse itself, and of course the entry into the new housing development. So swinging around slightly to the right of that, looking straight down the access, you can see the relationship between the gable of the farmhouse, the entry, and the new development. Swinging right to the big barn to the left of that, we have the frontage of the existing farmhouse, and then moving further down the access road and across the small paddock in between, we come to Nether Allen itself, a single-storey bungalow. Going slightly further down again, the access road, we come to the existing entry from the trunk road, which serves all the development as things stand at present. Swinging around slightly to the right of that photograph, we're now looking down the track which takes you down to the new farmsteading and of course the application site itself as well. go down that track a little bit further, more or less the corner that you see in the far distance, we get to part of the application site which crosses the access track and where it abuts the trunk road. The steading is available in the photograph as well. You see that set at a slightly lower level down from the access. Swinging slightly to the right of that photograph, we get the full steading, new steading as it stands. The photograph slightly foreshortens things here. There is actually a greater distance and more of a slope than the photograph might suggest, just because the foreground comes to the forward there. Swinging slightly further to the right of that photograph again, we look across the main part of the application site and towards, of course, the countryside beyond. Again, swinging right to the right of that photograph, we get the extent of that eastern boundary of the application site, which extends beyond the fence line and slightly over the rise and down into the field beyond. Again, swinging to the right of that photograph, we take in, almost looking back towards where we'd come from, back towards the farmsteading, and this shows you some of the planting towards that eastern side of the application site, which will appear again in the next photograph when we step back from it. This is us now standing in the application site, basically in the position of the proposed house, looking back towards the original farmsteading, and as I say, in skyline you see some of the planting on that eastern side. Swing round to the left of that photograph, we're looking across the lower part of the total application site, and also towards the countryside as well in that northeastern direction. Again from the position of the house approximately. Swing round to the left of that photograph again, again looking across the countryside in that northerly direction. And then to turn round and, as it were, look in the opposite direction, this is us looking up the application site towards the trunk road. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. Turning in summary to the applicant's case, the original farmsteading is being redeveloped to provide some 19 dwellings. The existing farmhouse is adjacent to this development. A new steading of modern farm sheds has been erected some 300 metres to the west. In 2017, an application for a two-storey house was made at the application site to provide a new farmhouse close to the new steading. This was declined as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy RD3 on the grounds that insufficient operational need had been demonstrated and Policy PM1A regarding visual impact. Following discussions with the Planning Service, the proposal was amended to form the current proposal, notably to reduce the house to a single-storey property and reposition the house to the lowest part of the site. The proposal seeks to provide accommodation for the applicant's parents in a granny flat, and the applicant's children, all of which are involved in the farming business. The applicant's long-established family farming enterprise is based on the rearing and exporting of cattle and embryos from a premier Aberdeen Angus herd. The house would have a role as a base for this business and conducting meetings with clients who come from many countries. The progression of the business, which contributes to the economy of Perth Kinross, is seen as being limited without the proposed house. It would also provide for improved security and overseeing in terms of animal welfare. The existing house is expensive to maintain and heat and set a distance from the new steading. The site is seen as a redundant piece of farmland sectioned off by a post and wire fence from the field to the north, woodland to the east, and a bullpen to the west, and the farm access track to the south. It could be described as rural brownfield land. The change to a single-storey building and repositioning of the house enables it to sit lower in the landscape by some 3 metres in comparison with the original proposal. The proposed planting and prospective acoustic fencing would also provide screening from the A9 trunk road. The site is seen as an ideal location and blends with the farm setting. Turning in summary to the officer's report of handling, the proposal falls to be assessed in relation to the 6 categories of Local Development Plan Policy RD3 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide. The applicant envisages that the existing farmhouse would be demolished and used as a source of stone for the proposed house. However, this approach does not comply with Category 4F. The policy requires additional buildings to be repaired rather than demolished wherever feasible. If the existing house was being demolished, a replacement house should be constructed on the same site, unless the site conditions suggest that another position would create a better landscape fit. The proposed site is the corner of a larger field, is bounded on 3 sides by post and wire fencing. There is some planting on the 4th side. It is directly visible from the adjacent A9 road. As such, it is not assessed as an identifiable site with long-established boundaries, which would enable it to be absorbed into the surrounding landscape. Under Category 3.3, Economic Activity, support can be given for the provision of a house for a local or key worker associated with an established economic activity in cases where sufficient need has been demonstrated. The applicant's submission links the ongoing success and expansion of the farm enterprise with the provision of the new house in an attractive position and outlook to welcome clients, many of whom come from other countries due to the farm's high-quality Aberdeen Angus stock. This is not viewed as providing sufficient justification for the proposed house, especially as there is an existing farmhouse at this general location, from where the farm building has been and is currently operated. In addition, the site selected is assessed as lacking sufficient containment as required by Section C of the siting criteria for any housing in the countryside. The proximity of the proposed house to the A9 would require the provision of a 2.5 metre high close-boarded acoustic fence to achieve sufficient attenuation from traffic noise if planning permission was being granted. The erection of the roadside fence, excuse me, beg your pardon. The erection of the roadside fence is seen as further eroding the visual amenity of the locality. The design and materials of the house in itself is considered to be acceptable. In conclusion, the proposal is not considered to be supported by Policy RD3 and the Housing in the Countryside guidance. There are no representations and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this report? Councillor Wilson.
Quite a few, Convener, thank you. I'm on page 491, first of all, which I think shows the overall site in relationship to the A9. And this is just, Mr Harrison, this is to save me asking questions about traffic and circulation. Am I right in thinking that if you're coming from the east, which is to the right of the page, I think,
Yes.
right, you can come off, safely come off the road there and go along the, what is in our papers, the red hatched access track and under the underpass, then back along the north side to either the new steading development or to the farm, or to the existing farmhouse and to the farm.
No, that wouldn't be the arrangement.
No,
Assuming
right.
you're coming from the Perth side, the east side, you would be basically going down that southbound carriageway until you get to the point where you see A9 on that particular drawing,
Yes.
and then crossing the northbound carriageway to enter the site. That's the situation as it stands at the moment. The hatched line you see on the, shall we say, the southern side of the trunk road there doesn't exist as a means of access, as it were, to and from the site. there is an underpass, which obviously I showed in the photographs, but the road, which basically is shown indicatively on that southern side of the dual carriageway, is an expectation, but it is not in existence at the moment, as I understand it.
Right, okay, so that's a future aspiration, plan, hope.
I think it's, to be a little more precise, it's, I think more than a hope, it is related, the provision of it, as I understand it, is related to the shall we say, the major housing development that's in process at the moment.
Okay, so it's planned to be?
Yes, I think there's a requirement
okay.
for it to be provided, yes.
My second question, Convener, relates to the same page, and where it says Netherton Farm, there's a, for want of a better expression, in the red line in Ingo on the hatched roadway. Is that the existing site of the existing farmhouse?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, the solid red line you see there is related to the housing development, not the proposal that's in front of you today.
And immediately moving left along the page, where it says existing farm buildings, where these letters are,
yes,
the proposed housing site is to the right of that.
Yes, it's between that and the, shall we say, the access with A9 written on it.
Yep, okay. Right. Thank you for the moment.
Councillor Anderson, any questions from you?
Yeah, and I'm glad that picture's left up, because there was a mention of, I take it that's where the house will be built, in that red square, and it's a question of it being a brownfield site rather than an agricultural field. Now, one can see there's material being tipped on there, and it looks like what I call from my farming days a hard standing or a stackyard. But it may be, and I don't know if anybody can answer this, is that actually been the hard standing for construction of houses and the new farm, and a recent brownfield site rather than some with a bit of history? Does anyone enlighten me on that?
I would hesitate slightly. The closest I can say is if you look in, if you like, Google Maps and Street View, you get an aerial photograph, which does show it sectioned off to a degree, but that's obviously relatively recent. My understanding that is historically it would have been part of a field. It may have been cordoned off for other purposes. For example, I'm speculating here, it might have been in relation to some of the building operations for the new farmsteading, but it is some distance from the building site that's on, for the construction of the houses. So, I mean, judging by the material there at the moment, which seems to be sort of like for making up roads and the like, it appears to be used indirectly in relation to farming enterprise as things stand at the moment, but its history, I suspect, is part of the larger field.
Also, second question is, there was a mention in your report of a key worker, but there's been no key worker assessment done by a consultant. I forget the acronym, but
no, like an SAC report. No,
SAC.
no. The applicant hasn't really submitted information to say the house is required for a key worker. The intention, as I think I summarised, is that it's for the applicant, who obviously operates the farm at the moment, and their family. In other words, for existing occupants, it's not to provide accommodation for an incoming worker, and a justification put forward in that context, which is, should we say, the more common circumstances you get an SEC report.
So technically, this wouldn't fit in the key worker. The policy we have for key workers at the moment wouldn't fit this.
Well, it's not being presented as that, and that's not really how it's been assessed, no.
Convener, I'm unsure about this site, the brownfield site, and there's other things about distances, etc. I would suggest a site visit rather than proceed, but maybe...
Councillor Wilson, have you
I
got
was about
questions
to
or-
come to that,
Right.
convener, but before I do, could I just ask
Yes,
one
indeed.
question?
Yeah.
I concur with the request, by the way, because there's a whole host of other questions that I think would be easier to ask on site. In the report of handling, I think, Mr. Harrison, you said if the house were to be constructed, it would need an acoustic fence, fence that would be detrimental. But we saw pictures earlier on of a very lengthy acoustic fence.
Mhm.
That's associated with what I would call the old farm site development.
That's right, yes.
Yes. Does that have consent?
My understanding, it was a requirement to provide it as part of the
Right.
introducing so many houses in such proximity to the road, yes.
And that development has consent,
Yes.
right? So there's an implication that the acoustic fence has consent. Would you know if at the time was there an issue raised about amenity? Because that's a long bit of acoustic fence. I'm not making any judgment about that.
No.
I'm simply describing what I saw in the photograph.
Mhm. No, it's not an application I've looked into in any, shall we say, any detail,
Yeah, okay.
as it's something which already has consent and is in place.
I think we should visit the site.
Thank you. I mean, I too am minded to visit. It's an area I know well, but in all fairness, I'm usually doing 70 miles an hour as I go past the way to Glasgow and back, so I think we would benefit from a look. But I just have one question, I mean, just to clarify, on page 491, Mr Harrison, we have the site of the existing farmhouse. I understand that the new farmhouse is going to go above the square hatch where it says existing farm buildings. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I mean, if you're visiting the site, it will be very clear.
Yeah. Can you just, I know there is a size at the top there. Just, can you give us an idea of how far the existing farmhouse is from the proposed new site, and then how far the new site is from the farm buildings? In the absence of a ruler, you know.
And well, there's reference to it being 300 metres from the bungalow, so it would suggest it's slightly more than 300 metres.
Yeah.
Depending on exactly whether you take it to the edge of the application site or to the house or whatever. The distance would appear to be maybe somewhere between a quarter and a third of that,
Yeah.
so maybe about 80 metres,
Yeah,
that
it is
sort of order.
considerably closer, right. Well, I think we're all decided we need to go and have a look, so I think we'll leave it with you, Mr Rounds, to arrange a site visit as soon as we can, and we'll get along and have a look. An unaccompanied site visit.
Mhm.
So you're happy where we are with that? That's, we're deferring our answer to that until such time as you've been for a site visit. Thanks so much indeed, and you were very patient. You know, prior to waiting. You haven't waited quite the longest, but very nearly. You know. Right, colleagues, we now come to the deferred applications review. We've already, those of you who were paying attention earlier, we know we've already dealt with 5.1, so we're now on to 5.2, which is erection of a wind turbine and associated works on land southeast of Warlaw Farm, Carnmel, Kinross. Can I ask if the agent or applicant is here today? No? Right. So, Mr Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. This is a planning application in detail for the erection of a wind turbine and associated works at land south east of Warlaw Hill Farm, beg your pardon, Carnmel, Kinross. The site lies in an area of elevated and undulating fields between the A91 and the A977. The turbine would be 18.5 metres to hub level and 25 metres to tip, giving a blade diameter of 30 metres. You might like to have page 683, provide your location plan, the site plan, associated drawings, and of course we have photo montages submitted with this, and they're on pages 6 to 7 onwards. So the first photograph is, say, looking north to Carnmel and the Ochils. from the, well, approaches to the application site. And then swinging to the right of that photograph, we're looking in a northeasterly direction, again taking in part of the Ochils, and that most eastern end of the Ochils, that is. And this is, as I say, on the approaches to the application site. As we swing round to the right of that photograph, we start to pick up the pylon lines as we look across the field at the top of the rise here, looking towards the Lomond Hills. Swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we look down the access track, and again you'll see the pylon line, and the site is of course in close proximity, the site of the actual turbines in close proximity to the pylon line at that point. Swinging round again to the right of that to give you an indication of the openness of the landscape looking in that westerly direction. If we move on from there, we move down to the field which occupies the application site. Again, we catch the turbine position and the green dot shown just to illustrate approximately where that is relative to the turbine. And this is us looking in a southeasterly direction, as it says, towards the Bennerty Hills. Swinging slightly to the right of that photograph, we're still catching the same turbine and the general position of the turbine site and the pylon, and we're now looking towards the Cleash Hills from that position. Swinging round to the right of that, again we follow the pylon line, I should say, as it crosses the countryside, going in that southwesterly direction. Moving now into the site itself, this is taking photographs from the actual position of the turbine. Again, now looking in an easterly direction, and then swinging round to the right of that, we look in a southeasterly direction again, and you can see the relationship between the turbine site and the pylon. Swinging round to the right of that again, we're now looking in a southerly direction from the site of the turbine. And I'll just leave you with that photograph. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, it is accepted that the turbine would have some degree of visual impact, particularly in the immediate locality. The planning officer accepts that the viewpoint analysis does not produce significant visual impacts within 1 kilometre, with the exception of viewpoint 4, where the turbine is seen against the backdrop of the Ochil Hills. The 25-metre high turbine would be significantly smaller than the 35-metre height of the existing pylon that crosses and tracks from this landscape. It is accepted that the turbine would introduce movement into such views. However, this is not viewed as detracting from the landscape to an unacceptable degree when the presence of the existing pylons are taken into account. This is particularly the case in relation to viewpoint 7, which demonstrates that the turbine would be relatively visible from the busy A977. However, considering the east-west orientation of the road, the turbine is assessed as being outside the dominant view of travellers. In relation to the rolling agricultural landscape of the Loch Leven Basin, the turbine is generally seen against a black cloth of rising ground. From higher elevations on the Ochil Hills, it would not be seen against the skyline. The officer's view that the turbine will appear significant in the landscape from the Ochil Hills Special Landscape Area is disputed due to the presence of other existing vertical features. Viewpoint 10, from the Cleash Hills, is assessed as demonstrating that the turbine would be indiscernible at this distance of some 5 kilometres. The applicant contests the officer's view that it would have a visual impact and cumulatively draw attention to Greenknow's wind farm beyond. At 25 metres, the scale of this turbine is limited in comparison to those at Bankhead and other refused and withdrawn proposals at South Kinduff and Kelvin Farm, which range from 47 to 49 metres. Both the lattice structure of the pylons and the form of the turbine is assessed as being slender. The 48 kilowatt turbine is projected to provide a power supply equivalent to the needs of 12 houses. In response to the officer's report, photomontages have been provided for viewpoints 9 and 10, and new photomontages have been provided for viewpoints 7 and 8. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. This proposal follows on from the recent proposal for two 15 kilowatt, 20 metre high turbines, 15 metres to hub and a rotor diameter of 10 metres at this location, which was recently refused. This proposal is not assessed as overcoming the concerns raised by that proposal. The site is positioned within the undulating landscape of the valley between the Ochil Hills to the north and the Cleash Hills to the south. The key issues are whether or not there would be, firstly, an unacceptable visual impact on the landscape, secondly, an impact on protected species, thirdly, an adverse effect on cultural heritage, and fourthly, compatibility with surrounding land uses. The site falls within the Lowland Loch Basin classification within the Tayside Landscape Character Assessment, which anticipated that, despite the lower wind speeds, improvements in technology may make this area attractive for turbine development. Local Development Plan Policy ER1 supports renewable energy development, subject to consideration of the visual integrity and landscape impact of the proposal. The submitted viewpoint information has been assessed and may be summarised as follows. The proposal, as seen from viewpoints at Gelvin Moor Road, Carnbore, Belfield, Gelvin and the A91, raises different considerations such as the degree to which the turbine would break the skyline and viewed in association with the pylon line. Overall, the proposal is not seen as resulting in significant impact on the visual amenity of the landscape from these positions. From the A977, the full height of the turbine could be seen rising above the skyline and in conjunction with parts of Greenknowes wind farm. Also, the viewpoints from the higher ground to the north are seen as confirming concerns regarding the visual impact on the landscape. With the exception of the turbines at Bankhead Farm, there are no similar developments in the Loch Leven landscape character area. The Bankhead Farm turbines are conspicuous and are seen as demonstrating the sensitivity of the landscape in accommodating turbine developments. Consequently, approving a further turbine is viewed as increasing the detrimental impact of vertical structures in the flat and open character of the landscape. Similar concerns have been raised by the other proposals in this locality, which have either been refused or withdrawn. Although smaller than the pylons, the proposal is not directly comparable due to the attention drawn by the movement of the turbine blades. Regarding cumulative impact, there are 10 energy developments within a 5-kilometre radius. The proposal would, in the officer's view, draw the presence of the Greenknowes wind farm closer to the valley landscape. The proposal would extend the presence of the turbines further to the east when viewed along with the higher turbines at Bankhead Farm. Views from the elevated core paths within the special landscape area to the north are also seen as being adversely affected. The proposal is not viewed as raising significant concerns regarding compatibility with existing land use, protected species, cultural heritage, traffic, shadow flicker, aviation, TV reception, residential amenity, subject to further investigation regarding noise. As a material planning consideration, the economic benefits regarding employment during construction, the contribution to the farm, and the savings in CO2 emissions have been taken into account, but are not seen as outweighing the foregoing assessment. In this case, there has been one representation from the Fossaway Community Council who object to the principle of the wind turbine development. In this case, there was a request for a site visit, which clearly has been undertaken. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Anderson?
No.
Councillor Wilson?
I think the site visit yesterday helped answer any questions we had.
Thank you. Given that I've made 2 site visits, on the first occasion we couldn't actually see anything, but if it's had 2 site visits, I think we have all the information we require, I suppose. But anyway, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do you require more information? Councillor Anderson?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Wilson?
Agreed.
I too agree we have sufficient information to proceed. So we will proceed to assess the case. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations to start things off?
Thanks, Convener. We had the benefit, as you've said, of a site visit yesterday, which we had reasonable weather conditions and opportunity to look at the site from a variety of different aspects. This is a very thorough report. It's accompanied by voluminous information, some of it pretty technical, to be blunt, but a lot of it is synthesised in what I would think is a very useful comprehensive report from the planning officer. In essence, and on balance, Convener, having read, and Mr Harrison summed up, I think, in his last 2 or 3 sentences, a lot of what I was going to say just now. On balance, I think we should agree to consent this wind turbine. And the reasons for that, I start off on page 672 of the report, and I'm going to quote from the detail of the planning officer's report, but of the viewpoints, viewpoint 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, at least partly, and with some coding, 7 and 8 were regarded, in my reading of the report by the planning officer, as being viewpoints where he didn't raise a material objection. And there were only 2 viewpoints where he felt there was a problem. I don't want to repeat what Mr Harrison has said in detail, but as far as compatibility with existing land uses, protected species, cultural heritage, transport and traffic, shadow flicker, aviation, TV reception, there are no problems identified by the planning officer. And therefore I think the balance of my view is that we should allow this. I find the conclusion that the planning officer has reached on page 679, where he's weighing the potential adverse landscape and visual impact of the scheme. I couldn't see any problem on site, to be blunt, Convener, about visual impact, considering the area is studded with pylons, which we've grown to accept. Turbines are a reality. We need to be careful about their siting. We need to be very conscious of our policies in that regard. But I think this one, it's not a case of it not complying with policy and we should approve. I think it does, on balance, comply with our policies. And I've used the planning officer's report to justify that. And I think with the suitable conditions, we should grant the application.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I've read through this, and as my colleague has very eloquently described, when one looks at the amount of sites that's been assessed on the balance, it seems to be that most of the sites is acceptable, and we've only got maybe 2 or 3 One has to take into context too that these wind turbines can be up to 125 metres. This one is 25 metres. This is a very modest one, and I think it will fit well in, if it's positioned where it should be, it will fit well into the landscape and will not be have unacceptable adverse landscape impact. One thing I was concerned about, because I'm getting a bit of a geek looking at these things as I go about the countryside, you can't help it when they always appear in front of us either here or at development management, is some of the smaller ones, the actual impeller, or whatever you call it, the blades, seem to rotate faster and it catches the eye. And whilst I was driving round, it's taking care to have a look at the ones that could, with a cumulative impact, be considered. And what caught my eye wasn't them, it was actually the bird scarers in the field as we're driving round, which they seem to have very brightly coloured bird scarers now. And if one was to catch one's eye, these 8 or so in the field seem to catch my eye more than the 2 turbines up in the field further on. So I think one has to take everything into the right context, and there is areas where wind turbines is not acceptable. Some of them are poorly designed, some of them just stick out terrible, but this is not one of them. And I think it hasn't been broached, but one of the ways that can improve is the 2 I did see are quite glossy, bright looking turbines. Perhaps if it was possible, these ones might have a more matte finish or greyer finish, unless that causes more bird strikes, who knows, maybe that's the reason that they're bright in times. But anyway, I would uphold the officers, not the officers, I would uphold the appellant's appeal against this.
Thank you very much. There is a balance, as Councillor Wilson says, and I'm glad you went for a site visit, because I certainly couldn't identify a particular adverse impact in that particular area, given, as Councillor Anderson says, it's a relatively modest proposal in terms of size. I think we could maybe take some advice, Mr Harrison, from you or Mr Vogt, to do with the colour of the proposed installation and any conditions that we could attach to that.
My only comment, Convener, would be that I think the view in some quarter is that there is potentially quite a lot to be gained by careful palette and colour selection, and it is worthy of effort on the part of the planning authority and developer to determine what is the least intrusive or the best fit in this particular landscape context, and that is a standard condition that one would have expected to be applied here.
Yeah. Yes, I wouldn't add anything to that. I think yes.
Well, I think then, Mr Vogt, that we are unanimous that we would refuse the refusal, as it were, and go for to consent this application with appropriate condition. And I think again we would leave it to you and Mr Harrison to do the appropriate form of words on that. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Right, colleagues, we now move on to item 5.3, which is erection of an office building class 4, including access ramp, 3 ancillary storage sheds, formation of car parking, external storage area, landscaping and associated works in retrospect at Hillview, Kinloch, Blair Gowrie. Can I ask if the applicant or agent are here today? You, the applicant, your name, sir? Peter Brown. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome. You'll be very patient. Mr Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the erection of an office building class 4, including access ramp, 3 number ancillary storage sheds, formation of car parking, external storage area, landscaping and associated works at Hillview, Kinloch, Blairgowrie. This is a retrospective planning application. The building is single-storey with a pitched roof, including solar panels, and rendered walls and coins. This is accessed from a private road and served by a private drainage system. The application site is located on rising ground facing south and, with the exception of the access, has boundaries onto farmland on all sides. There is an L-shaped group of buildings lying to the west, the A923 Blairgowrie to Dunkeld Road, and the Loch Cluny and Marley SSSI and Dunkeld Loch Special Area of Conservation lie to the south. I'll just take you through the photographs to remind you of the site visit which was undertaken yesterday, but just very briefly, you might like to page 851 onwards, which will provide you with the location plan, the site plan, and drawings of the building. So this is us coming down, shall we say, from the Blairgowrie direction, looking in the easterly direction. One or two of the photographs may not be identical to what was on the site yesterday, because obviously the photographs were carried forward from the previous application, but they're essentially the same. As I say, looking in an easterly direction towards Blairgowrie, then swing round to the left, we see the application site as viewed from the public road. Swing round to the left again, we see more of the other buildings fronting onto the public road. This is us looking in a westerly direction. And then moving on from there, we move into where we saw the number of houses which fronted onto the access road. And of course, the access is between the two modern houses you see in this photograph. So, accessing the site between those two houses, looking in an easterly direction, takes us through to the application site itself. This is us looking from the application site in a southeasterly direction, and swinging round to the right of that, we see the loch and some of the other properties which were in the earlier photograph, so looking in that southerly direction, and swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we see the main body of those houses looking in a southwesterly direction. Moving on from that, I say this was the area where we saw the number of, shall we say, items, including the caravan, sheds, and a small unit. This is in the lower southeastern corner of the application site. And I say this represents the position at the time of the photographs. Moving on from that, just to give you an idea of the context, this is the field to the east, and swinging round to the right of that again, we look down past that caravan and the land beyond towards the loch again. And we have a drainage facility in the foreground here. Swinging to the right of that again, we look across part of the land which has been laid out as garden ground. And swinging round to the right of that again, we catch the frontage of the property. Swinging round again to the right, we catch the gable of the property and the rising ground to the rear. So if we go round, as it were, the back of the property, we see the area which has been created as a sort of hard standing or gravel area to the rear of the property and a retaining wall. And if we go to the higher ground, this is us looking back down on the back of the property. So I'll just leave you with that front elevation photograph. Turning in summary to the applicant's case, first of all, by way of introduction to the planning history of the site is a material planning consideration. There appears to be no dispute between the planning officer and the applicant as to the main dates and facts which set the background context for the current proposal. These may be summarised as follows. There was a planning application for the erection of 2 houses in 2005, which was withdrawn, and a planning application for a holiday home in 2011, which was refused. This was followed by a prior notification application for a general purpose agricultural building, which was given consent in 2012. In 2014, the applicant's agent sought the planning authority's view as the building had been erected further north of the approved position. They were advised that a planning application would need to be made to seek to regularise the situation retrospectively. Although no application was received, the view taken by the Council's officers at that time was that it was not in the public interest to initiate formal enforcement action given the limited planning harm and the approved use of the building for agricultural purposes. The building was subsequently brought into use as a house by the then applicant and previous owner, Mr. Burke, who made a retrospective planning application seeking to regularise the residential use of the building and its altered design and position in November 2016. This planning application was refused as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy RD3, housing in the countryside. The subsequent appeal to the local review body was dismissed in October 2017. An enforcement notice was served seeking the cessation of the residential use. The notice was served on the current applicant as the new owner of the property. The appeal against that notice was dismissed by the DPEA in May 2018. The applicant is now seeking the change of use of the building and its curtilage for a Class 4 business purpose and retrospective permission for the changed position of the building, the access ramp, 3 sheds, an external storage area, parking and landscaping. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, the applicant has operated a very successful landscaping business for some 30 years, focusing on the Dundee and Perthshire area. Regarding the proposal, the building has been designed as a house and is seen as being readily converted for business accommodation. This, together with the land forming the application site, would meet the requirements of the applicant's existing and expanding business without significant internal or external alteration. Externally, sheds and outside storage is envisaged for the rear of the building. Areas for the display, storage and propagation of plants and for landscaping materials is also proposed. The existing storage huts on the site are capable of being moved. Regarding planning considerations, the applicant has drawn attention to Scottish Government policies and publications and the Council's economic strategy in relation to small and medium-sized enterprises in support of his application to establish his business at this rural location. These are contained in full in the papers. Regarding Local Development Policy PM1A, the applicant recognises that the use of the building as a dwelling is unlawful and needs to cease to comply with the enforcement notice. The building is permanent and benefits from planning permission as an agricultural building. The building is The building is unrelated to any farm unit. Any environmental harm from the development is seen as negligible and can be addressed through conditions to relocate storage sheds and undertake landscape planting. Regarding Local Development Policy ED3, that states a preference, not a definite requirement, for rural business to be within or adjacent to settlements. The proposal is seen as meeting all of the criteria in this policy in that, firstly, it's compatible with adjoining land uses, building designs, and would not adversely affect residential amenity. Secondly, the building has been accepted in the landscape. Thirdly, there is a locational need for the business. And fourthly, access is satisfactory and no retailing is involved. In addition, attention is drawn to an English court decision regarding Gypsy Travellers sites and questions of proportionality and reasonableness and rights under Article 8, Part 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The applicant considers that there has been a complete disregard to his personal circumstances in assessing his proposal to the extent that the planning authority's actions have been disproportionate and unreasonable. regarding the change of circumstances, the applicant bought the property believing the building to be a lawful dwelling house. He also intended it to accommodate the relocation of his long-established family business from Berglowry to the site, both for himself and that of the next generation of his family. As well as having nowhere to stay, the refusal of permission would cause his business model to fail with extreme personal financial consequences. He challenges the proportionality of this decision to refuse planning permission in relation to the reasonableness of the restriction. The reasonableness of the restriction this places on his personal property and circumstances as a result of the council pursuing its legitimate policy goals and objectives. In the applicant's view, granting permission does not adversely affect any public interest, has no policy implications, and would not set an undesirable precedent. Refusal raises the prospect of the building becoming disused. The applicant sees his business as contributing to the local economy, and Local Development Plan Policy ED3 only indicates preference for business uses to be within or adjacent to a settlement. In conclusion, the proposal is considered to be in accordance with the Local Development Plan, and there are material considerations in favour of planning permission being granted. A temporary consent would also be acceptable to the applicant. Turning now in summary to the Officer's report of handling. As previously indicated, the planning history of the application site is seen as a relevant planning consideration in assessing this proposal and understanding the background circumstances to the current proposal. Scottish planning policy emphasises the importance of locating the right development in the right place as part of delivering sustainable economic development. One of the key objectives of the Local Development Plan is to reduce the need for travel whilst increasing economic sustainability. In this context, Local Development Plan Policy ED1A identifies locations for employment uses being generally within or adjacent to settlements. At this location, Local Development Plan Policy ED3 is the most relevant policy. In broad terms, this gives favourable consideration to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. However, there is a preference for these to be within or adjacent to settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where an existing business is being diversified or there is a site-specific resource or opportunity. The applicant has indicated that his business operates from Blairgowrie, but that site is too small for his purposes. No evidence has been provided to suggest that the application site has a site-specific resource which is met by this location or for this particular business. Similarly, there is no evidence that the present and future requirements of this business could not be met elsewhere at a more sustainable location, for example, land currently allocated for business in Blairgowrie. In planning and sustainability terms, it is seen as more logical and appropriate for a business of this nature to be located within a settlement in a designated employment area as indicated by Policy ED3. Consequently, in the absence of any detailed site-specific justification, the principle of the proposed development at this location is assessed as failing to comply with the requirements of Local Development Plan Policy ED3. A business at this location has the potential for generating noise, which would be a source of disturbance to the residents of the nearby houses. In assessing the proposal in relation to Local Development Plan Policy EP8, the officer concludes that the proposal could operate without detriment to the residential amenity, provided it adhered to conditions controlling hours of operation, plant and equipment control, external lighting, and in terms of a noise management plan. The building is seen as having a prominent position separate from the building group as viewed from the public road. The erection of an agricultural building on the site at a slightly lower position was allowed through the prior notification procedure. As such, the building itself is not seen as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy PM1A and PM1B regarding placemaking. However, the storage sheds and the outdoor storage areas in front of the building are seen as changing the character of the site. Notably, the shed is seen as failing to make a positive contribution in accordance with Policy PM1A. Regarding drainage, the site lies within the Lunan Valley catchment area, where Local Development Plan Policy EP6 and the associated supplementary guidance applies. These seek to protect the water quality of the Dunkeld Blairgowrie Loch Special Area of Conservation and the Loch Cluny and Marley SSSI, notably regarding phosphorus discharge. Out with settlements, there is a presumption against development in this catchment area, except, for example, for the renovation or alteration of existing buildings and development necessary for economic need. On the basis of the implementation of the phosphorus mitigation proposal submitted, SEPA and SNH have withdrawn their initial objections to this proposal. In conclusion, while recognising that there is some economic benefit associated with the relocation of the business from Blairgowrie, this is not assessed as being sufficient to set aside the principle of the proposed development at this location failing to comply with the requirements of Local Development Plan Policy ED3. In this case, there are no representations. I would, however, draw your attention to the further information submitted in response to the LRB's request for further information, and this is contained on page 1067 onwards. There was a request for a site visit, which clearly has been undertaken now. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor Anderson.
No questions.
Councillor Wilson.
A couple, and this relates to the submission on behalf of the applicant. I'm on page 808. And there's a description there of the business. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I won't narrate them all. Mr Harrison, do you know if the business has a yard? Is there still a base at Blairgowrie? Is there still a yard that has equipment and materials on it?
If you turn to page...
Have I missed something? Is this
if you turn to page 1071,
I'm on there, yeah.
the plan you see on page 1071 is referenced in a letter from the applicant's planning consultant, which is on page 1067.
Right, I've got that, yep.
And you might notice that under part 4 of that, this is referenced to, I'll read it to you, this is probably the simplest thing. The plan enclosed by the agent illustrates the extent of the land occupied by Mr Brown, from which he operated his business in Blairgowrie. And my understanding...
Operated or operates? Because most of this seems to be in the past tense. I read it as the past tense.
Right, I think...
Not the present tense.
Just to be clear, I think that's this property here. Just to be clear on that. I think I've got one more photograph. And I've put the shared position question mark because that appears on that plan as part of the supplementary information that was submitted.
That's the former site. Right? That's the former site.
Well, that appears to be the site being referred to in the supplementary information, yes.
Right. It shows a shed position. I'd looked at that, but what I was expecting to see or hear was that there was either an alternative place for vehicles, materials, and such like, apart from the application site. But that was the previous site.
Well, all I can say that that's the applicant's response to the request by the
Right.
local review body for information on that
So
aspect.
that clarifies it. I was just wondering if there was anywhere else that there was storage of materials. Right. I'll go back then to where it was on page 808.
Yes.
There are 5 people, workforce of 5 persons. On the paragraph immediately below the indication of what the business undertakes, the display of products, do we know what that means? Line 3 there, display of products, do we know what that means?
I can only assume that it means products related to his landscaping type enterprise.
Okay. And we don't, and my final question on that page is the just above succession planning, form of temporary accommodation lodge on site which will require planning permission. That's would still be to come.
That is not part of the proposal in front
Not
of
part
you.
of
It's
the proposal.
is looking forward. Yes.
And have we any indication what that lodge would be for?
No, I think you're looking at the only reference to the lodge that I'm aware of in the papers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I have no questions, so I think we can proceed to the preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning officer, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Wilson.
I agree.
I too am happy to proceed, colleagues. And we will assess the case and move to debate. And I'll start things off because having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, I am ready to start. I think, colleagues, although there's a large amount of information here, it's a fairly straightforward decision for us. It seems to me that this is the wrong development in the wrong place. I think there are no, as it says in the reasons for refusal, there is no particular reason to be located here. There is no specific resource right here. And I have seen, despite voluminous papers, no locational justification for this specific area. So I think with that, colleagues, I would move that we uphold the reasons for refusal as indicated here, with possibly an addition or two, but my view would be that we uphold the 2 reasons on page 827. Councillor Anderson, have you any further to add?
Very little. It's very unfortunate that the gentleman has purchased this piece of land with this house on it. One would have thought some legal advice would have helped him, but however, we see this often, that this is what happens, and unfortunately there was never any time, there has never been any time apart from an agricultural shed that there's been planning permission given for anything else than an agricultural shed on this piece of land, and I see no reason to go away from that policy. So I'd upheld the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. Well, I think this is a singular inappropriate use of the land that's there. I don't think it fits at all into the landscape. I don't think it fits into the residential nature of the surrounding area. Access and everything else, I think, to me are wrong. I think the site at the moment is untidy, and I think that it's unfortunate that the situation has developed in the way it has. However, we are where we are now. We're asked to make a decision on an office development, and I don't think an office building Class 4, and I don't think this is an appropriate location for a Class 4 office building for the reasons explained in the report.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairperson. So that will be a unanimous decision, Mr Fogg, that we uphold both the reasons for refusal, both 1 and 2. I would, with my colleagues' agreement, like to add a little bit to reason 2. I think in the second line I would like to say that it fails to respect the quality of surrounding natural and residential environment. Because there are a lot of residential houses round about.
I would agree. I would agree with that.
So I think we're all agreed with that, Mr Fogg. So are we happy with that, Mr Fogg? So that's unanimous agreement that we uphold the reasons for refusal. Sorry about that. Thank you for your attendance.